All right. I will call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for June 15th, 2023. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. And if you will please join me in the flag salute.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item C is our calendar session. Anything to add to the calendar, commissioners, other than the Carlton Community Lunch next Friday, which I added.
And LGAC is in the morning from 10 to 12, virtually, I believe. I
LGAC
gave
is
that to
in,
Carolina.
okay. On
Local
which day?
government. Friday.
Friday, okay. Okay,
23rd. Yeah,
what time?
10 to 12.
Anything to add? Nope. Okay, item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. So if you have public comment on anything that is not related to the agenda items, which would include our budget talk and the McMinnville fire issue, please come forward now, or if you're online, please raise your virtual hand. I see a hand. I think it's the attendees. Oh. Here we go. Hi, Kelly, can you hear us?
Hi, I can. I'm driving and I'm off work today, but I just wanted to thank you all officially for supporting OSU Extension Service for another year, and just appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you. Sorry,
Thank you.
the meeting was a minute long, so.
That's okay. No, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Okay, hearing nothing further. Oh, I did want to acknowledge that we have received some public comment regarding parks. And I looked into some of the information that was in the emails that came in. Commissioners, you have received those emails as well. I don't really know where this misinformation is coming from, other than I've seen some posts by Progressive Yamhill that are alluding to the fact that we are moving towards selling our parks to private entities, which has not been discussed in any board meeting that I have sat in the past 3 years. So I'm not sure why this misinformation is coming forward. But I did respond directly to some of the public comment that came in, especially with regard to Crabtree Park in Dundee. This culvert issue at the park, and perhaps Commissioner Johnston, you can speak to it more directly, but the culvert is not actually on our property. The culvert is on private property of the winery.
Correct.
That is adjacent to the park, which complicates the matter in terms of how do we fix the culvert.
Correct.
And so the discussion so far has been around how do we split the cost of it? Are grants even a possibility because it's on private land? Complicating the issue even further.
Yeah, and honestly, the biggest complication is the fish passage.
Yeah.
And how large the new culvert would have to be. And that's where a lot of the cost comes into. So this is not something that's going to happen overnight. Colton's been working on this for many a months.
Yeah.
Mark's, it's on his radar. We're getting there,
Yeah.
but it's a very large ticket item.
And CPRD has managed the park, and from my understanding, since almost day one,
Yep.
since we took it over.
Yep.
So that potentially is a possibility going forward that they would take over the park. It's certainly been a topic of discussion at the
Yep.
Parks Board meetings.
Yep.
So misinformation is not ever helpful. I would encourage you to join me in responding to those public comments and setting the record straight. So,
Chair.
okay. So we will move to our work session, which is, there's nothing on the work session for today. Item F is our department updates, and we are being joined today by our treasurer, Chris Bledsoe. Welcome, Chris.
Morning, Chris. Only one chair. So is this on?
Yes, it is.
It's working. Okay. So thank you for having me here today. I'm always happy to share information about what's happening with the investments of the county. So, you know, we could have parties and we could talk about it, or I can just come here occasionally. The one thing that I do regret is that what I want to talk about today is pretty much the end of the year numbers, and we're not really at the end of the year yet. So I had to kind of project the next couple of weeks in terms of how much we will actually receive this year in income. And so I have, and I'm sorry I sent out one in error, but I have the projection for not only this year for the dividend and interest income from our money, but also an estimate for next year for the income. Now, the good news is that interest rates have gone up considerably, and so we are making more money. Now, that's also bad news, but we can get something positive about in relation to inflation, which, by the way, is stabilizing. I think that we may actually get to see something closer to 3% by the end of the year. That's just my guess. As you probably know, yesterday, the Federal Reserve opted to not increase rates this month. It's quite certain that they will do it next month as they continue to try to get inflation under control. Mostly what we have for the economy is very good news. The employment levels are high. The unemployment is low. We continue to have a shortage of workers throughout the country. Hopefully that will stabilize as well over the next year or two. The wages have gone up some over this year, but not as much as inflation. So the employees are lagging behind in terms of their spending power. But they have, I imagine that will catch up too, as you probably know, because you're negotiating with unions right now. But the other couple of things that I wanted to mention that is happening right now in terms of the economy is that the banks, which if you were at my last meeting, I believe that all the commissioners were, the banks are having a really tough time because of the increase in interest rates, because they hold a lot of investments at much lower rates and they're being squeezed. And but the good news is that even though we've had 3 rather large banks fail this year, that I think the government has putting in some things to help prevent that from happening in the future. But I wouldn't be surprised to see another 1 or 2 banks fail over the next 6 months because of this interest rate disparity that they're having to deal with. One of the things that people are very concerned about, which of course affects the banks considerably, is that commercial properties are going down in value, and in some cases, like in San Francisco, they're just walking away from hotels, they're walking away from shopping malls, and the banks are absorbing these losses. So this will continue to be a strain for the banks. And as long as there's a strain for the banks, obviously it's affecting the entire economy. The flip side of that is the consumers are continuing to spend at a reasonable rate. The inflation for the consumers in some areas has gone down. The residential real estate is starting to go back up. It had started to go down a little bit, but the supply of homes is considerably less than what we need to actually get people into homes, particularly at these higher interest rates. So there are still struggles, but for us, it's all good. With the price of gas, although I guess in Oregon, the price of gas is not going down, but oil is on the whole worldwide market has gone down in price considerably. So hopefully that will start to show up in our fuel, which will be a benefit to the county because I know the county spends a great deal on fuel for the sheriff's department and the maintenance, et cetera. So, and one last thing that I wanted to bring up is that Europe is officially now in a recession, and Europe cannot be in a recession without affecting us. So we need to watch that and make certain that we don't slip along with them, but we are not in a recession at this point. And most economists believe that if we go into a recession, that it should be mild. And it may not happen until towards the end of the year. So that's kind of a summary of where we are. And I know you probably all know that. But for me, that's kind of my life, is looking at all of that and making certain that I know what's happening. So one of the things that I mentioned is that our interest has gone up considerably. And if you have the sheet, which I entitled Yamhill County Interest Dividend Income Projection,
Yes.
you will see that this year we will probably earn about $1.6 million in interest and dividends. This is for the 22-23 fiscal year. And that is more than we've received in the recent past. But next year, and this is a really hard estimate to come up with because who knows? I mean, we went from 1% to 4% in terms of rates in less than a year. We could go the opposite as well. So I wouldn't want the county to bank on for budget purposes, bank on this greatly increased income and instead just treat it as a welcome bonus if it happens the way that I anticipate it will. So we're looking at $2.5 million in interest and dividends for the year 23-24, which is considerable amount of cash that will help the departments. That for those people who might be watching or listening to this, the monies that come in from these investments go to the departments that have the assets. In other words, Health and Human Services, because they have so much grant money, a lot of their money is what I'm managing, and the monies that proportionately are earned are given back to Health and Human Services. And that's the same is true with other departments that have some cash. So it's not that the money just sits there in a pile somewhere and the commissioners can rub their hands and go, oh, we've got $2.5 million. It's not, and it's being accounted for, and you know that it's welcome income for the departments that actually receive it. Disappointing for those departments that don't get any of it because they don't have any cash sitting around, but Health and Human Services definitely benefits from that. So that's kind of what we anticipate for the year. I just did, there is the actual summary. It's the report that's entitled Clear Water Analytics Yamhill County Aggregate is a projection for the year ending June 13th. And it just substantiates what I've been saying about income received. But it also shows you that we are very, very conservatively, you can't get more conservatively invested than we are. We are an average credit rating of AAA, which, as you know, is the highest possible rating. Our years to final maturity is 1.2. I am not investing and haven't for quite some time in anything longer than 6 months. But we have still a large amount of funds invested in the last 2 years when interest rates were incredibly low, that are still earning those really low rates. So anything I'm buying now is coming in at least 5%. But we have some bonds that are paying 1/4%, and they may be on the books for another year or so. And so they'll bring down the overall return for those items. We cannot sell those bonds because we are in the same squeeze that the banks are. If we sell those bonds, we lose money. So we just hold them to maturity. And every financial institution in the country is facing the same squeeze. I know I have talked to others in the industry, and nobody really wants to admit to the fact that they have these bonds in their portfolio, but they do, including the state. Although the state has the ability with OLGIP to sell at a loss if they feel that it makes sense to do that. Based on our investment policy, we cannot sell bonds unless there is an emergent reason to do so. So we will hold those until they mature. That's all I have to say. I know you've got a full calendar. I did give you a page with all of the rates compared. Like a year ago, the 3-month treasury was 1.06%, and now it is 5.27. So you can see what we've dealt with this year. And hopefully next year will be much more stable. Any questions?
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your holistic view of how our investments relate to everything that's going on in the economy.
Thank you.
And certainly the state budget officers recently pushed out the expectation of a recession to next year is what they said, but obviously that could change. A couple questions. The estimated income for 23-24 at 2.5, does that factor in the spend down of ARPA?
That's one of the things that was hard for me to estimate, because we did earn 141,000 in dividends from the ARPA funds last year. Not knowing when the ARPA funds will actually be spent, because I'm not privy to what goes on. I mean, I could ask, but it's not, nobody needs to include me in timing of things. But not knowing that, I did bring the LGIP balance in my estimate to 20,000. We basically, 20 million. We've basically been closer to 25 million most of the year. So I am kind of taking that dip into account. The other thing is that, of course, we don't know what the rate will be. I assume that the 4% that we're earning now is probably going to go up. So my best guess is we'd have 20 million on average in LGIP. And I gave it a 4% rate of return to be conservative. I think it will be higher than that over the year. Whenever I'm talking about next year's income, I like to make certain that I'm being conservative with those figures, but that's a very good question, Lindsay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then you had expressed concern about having balances above 250 in our accounts. Is that
Right.
Is that still a concern of yours, or are you less concerned now?
Mike Barnhart, our finance manager, sent me a copy of the method that the state has for covering those excess for public funds, those excesses. So all the banks, as it turns out, put in money to cover any downfall of any of the other banks, to cover public funds that are over 250. So, and US Bank, which is our bank, actually puts more in there percentage wise that some of the other organizations do.
Okay.
So it's not guaranteed by the feds, but it is guaranteed by the system. So we should be fine.
It's good to know. All right, commissioners, any questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say how much I appreciate the regular updates you send us, the information, the way you explain it, and that at your meetings, you take into account not only explaining, going back and, you know, some of the base code of what it is you do and bringing us up to speed. So I do appreciate how you've been doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment.
So I have a question. It doesn't need to be answered right now, maybe an email follow-up, but I'd be curious if you picked one of those bonds as an example, if it was to be sold at a loss, what it would be. And because what I would like to see is a comparison of what that loss would be, and then if it was reinvested in a 6-month at the 4%. I just want to see what that
5%.
comparison would be.
I'd be happy to do that. I've actually been thinking about that. I would, if I think that it's possible for some of them that we would be better selling them. But in order to do that, I have to, and I'll answer your question, but what we'd have to do is, since we'd be making an exception to our investment policy, it would not be as straightforward as me just trading.
Doing it, yeah.
I would need to talk to all of you and the people on the committee and get everybody's buy-in to that. So if it's not too long to wait, if I can, and I'll send you some, but if I can do that, my idea was to present that at our next meeting, which is, by the way, for people who don't already get notices of that, our next advisory meeting is Tuesday, July 18th at 9 a.m. And at that point, I'd like to do a couple of things. One, we will review, because we're required to do that. We will review our investment policy, make certain that we want to keep it as is. And then the second thing is we need to look at this difference, because it's substantial.
It is, yeah, from a
It is.
0.25% to, well, you said 5, but on this one, it shows a 4 as projected, but that was you just being conservative.
Me being
Right,
conservative.
okay.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, that's a huge difference to where if you can take a loss on selling a bond and get it back into a 6-month.
Right.
Okay.
I agree with you. I think it's a good idea to look at that. And as long as I have the support of everybody involved, then I think there's no reason why we can't do it. But we just need to make certain and make note of the fact that it is an exception.
Okay.
The auditors, when they come around, you know, they'll say, why'd you do that? It's because the commissioner said I could. Yeah.
Well,
So
We're used to taking the blame.
yeah, it's Kit's fault.
Yeah, right.
He's the newest on the board. We'll go after him.
Kit likes to sell stuff.
Yeah, I've heard he likes to sell stuff. Yeah. So,
Okay, well, maybe add that to the agenda for July and we can certainly address that.
okay, and I will send out some, as I go along, I'll send some stuff out, so you won't
Okay.
be totally surprised.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank
Chris.
you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay. Nothing else? Have a good day.
You too.
Take
Yeah.
care.
I don't want to make anyone feel bad, but I'm part-time, so I'm going to the farmer's market.
Enjoy.
Enjoy it. Okay. Okay. That concludes our department update. Moving on to the consent agenda. The only comment I have is just about the refund number 5. This is I don't think we've done one of these yet for Commissioner Johnston, but this is a blanket order that the commissioners sign off on, and it allows the assessor to issue refunds that are typically small. But it allows him to do that without having to come before the commissioners each time in a hearing. And they have a practice of notifying us of anything that's a refund over $5,000. So they're substantial. 259 refunds were issued last year. So it saves a lot of time and effort with that process. And also, I don't know if you caught during AOC meetings, but BOPTA's name is changing.
I didn't hear that.
I can't remember what it was changing to. Did you catch that?
Nope.
Okay, I'll have to follow up and see, but yeah, BOPTA's name is officially changing according to the legislature. So I will move approval of the consent agenda. Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. All right. Item H is old business. We have nothing today. Item I, other business.
Chair, and if I may, we need to make a correction on this agenda. Item I1 was mistakenly added to this agenda. That was already acted on
Yeah.
last week, so we need to remove that. There's no action or discussion required on I1.
We
Okay,
can blame Jody for that.
No,
No.
no.
that was
How
the
dare you.
Hopewell lots. Yeah.
How dare you?
Okay, so item I2 is consideration of a bid for tax lot R6701 DB 07600 county-owned tax foreclosed real property. And I believe this is the Ash Street property.
This is Ash Street. Yes. So this property went to auction May 31st and failed. We didn't get any bids. We immediately got one bid, which is the first one I'll read. So that one's already been opened because it was given in
Person.
open.
Mhm.
Yeah. We got one that was emailed to us. We've seen that one as well. And then we have two that were sealed. So we have 4 in total. Ready?
We're ready.
Go for it? All right. And just to clarify, if the board doesn't want to accept any of these bids, we can always go back out to auction if that's what your preference is. It's entirely up to you.
Because I thought you were gonna clarify that it wasn't a park.
Ash Street?
Yeah.
Ash Street is not a park. Ash Street is one of our few properties with a house on it. So, yes, no. This one is not a park. Okay, first one. Is from Amberstone Investment Partners LLC. It looks like it's a company out of Salem. He was at the auction. He's bid 60,000. And he did provide that 10% down payment in cash.
60,000.
60,000. And the real market, yes, the real market value. I believe the real market value, according to the assessor's office, is somewhere around 200,000 for this property.
Okay.
It does need some work, but it is a house.
Large lot too.
Mhm.
I mean, fairly good sized lot.
It's okay. Yeah, it is right across the street from open. I don't know if it's city owned, but open trails and stuff. It's nice. I'm not sure which one was emailed, but I'm just gonna open them in the order Noelle had them. So this one. This one is from Trinity Mountain Investments LLC. They're out of Corbett. They have bid 79,000. Okay, so the third bid is. Does not have a name on it. This says TBD. Somebody from jen@changecommercial.com. Out of Newburgh. They have bid 70,000. So we've got a 60,000, a 70,000, and a 79,000 so far. And the last one. Bringing a letter opener. It is from Chandler and Newville Inc. Real Estate Investments. And they have bid 82,205. They are out of Newburgh as well. So that is the high bid.
82,205. Okay.
So the minimum bid at auction was 99,000. Maybe a little less than that, somewhere around there. So
Okay.
it's not that far off. So I think the only thing I would need from you today is direction. Do you want me to move forward with a deed, or would you rather I re-auction the property?
Well, I think the 82 is pretty close to the minimum bid. And considering the history of this property, I think that we probably should accept the high bidder at this point.
Staff has invested considerable time and effort in dealing with this property, so I appreciate that. I know Noelle has, you have.
Christian,
Um,
and all the way
Christian
back to McKaylee and Todd.
Yeah,
I've
it's
spent a lot of time and effort on this property. So yeah.
It's been around for a while, so I would be in agreement that that 82,205 is again closest to the minimum bid. So I would hope that we could accept that and move forward, and it can become a house that someone can, affordable house that somebody can buy, and we can put it on the tax rolls.
Agreed.
All right.
Did I see a hand raise for public comment? No? Okay.
I don't know the form of how this operates, but I was wondering, I did include the letter.
Could you give us your name?
My name is Jennifer Maxfield. I was the $70,000 bid. I did include a letter in there as far as the purpose for this house. We work with Safe Families and with Lutheran Family Services. And it is our desire to have the house renovated and then either hold the loan for someone that somebody could step in and become a homeowner, because a lot of the families that we interact with are ready to step out of subsidized living and own a home. And last I heard, Oregon's the most expensive place to live.
Mhm.
So
I don't see a letter. I don't know if you,
it was included in my bid.
okay,
with the check.
there's nothing in here though. So I hope, did you send it to somebody else?
No, it was all
Okay, well,
sealed.
I will ask Noelle.
Okay.
But there's no letter. So if you want to email that to me,
Okay,
I can forward
sure, I'd
that
be
to the
happy
board
to.
as well.
But it just outlined our plan of what we were proposing and that we would not be posting it for market value. So somebody would be able to step into it and have equity as well as, which would hopefully be an incentive for them too. And then we would be able to maintain the, it would be a contract of some sort, that they would pay until they reach this mark and then they could assume, right, the rest of the home is our desire. That was our plan.
Okay.
We aren't commercial flippers. We aren't.
I do have it. You're not Trinity. You're the TBD.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
because
Yes,
I
I do
didn't
have a
know.
letter. I can get that to you guys.
Okay.
Yes.
So considering the information and just, I want to be fair to the other bidders too, if they are watching and want to offer some comment. So perhaps.
Do you want me
we
to
can-
read it? The letter?
I would prefer that we just kind of take another week.
Sure.
So
We can do that
We can read
for
it
sure.
privately.
Yes. I will
Does
get
that work
to
for
the board.
everybody?
Chair, a couple of things. Thank you for that information, and that's important.
Mhm.
And one of the things we do when we work with our partners is that we are always looking for opportunities to take these foreclosed properties, since we can't, again, return the equity
Yeah.
to the owner, that we find a way for some social benefit. Safe Families definitely fits
Mhm.
the bill. So I would be interested in that. Again, it might not at the end of the day change anything, but I think it's really important. But we would need to have a plan, because in the past, a good intention doesn't necessarily get a property actually across the finish line. And if we have somebody who's willing to rehab it and get it on the market, but if you've got something more than, an idea and an actual plan to finance the rehabilitation, and then also what is the process for selling it to one of our Safe Families? And then how do we make sure that it becomes affordable housing that then isn't turned around and flipped? We've had that concern in the past. where it
Exactly.
Goes up for market value, and that's not something that we would be interested in
Right.
doing if we're going to sell it for less
Mm.
than the highest bid. So if we could talk further about the
Sure.
specifics of your plan.
Yeah.
Would you like me to reach out to all the bidders and request that same information, or?
Well, if anybody else has the same kind of
Okay.
purpose in mind, you know, I think we have to consider that. I would like to consider that.
Okay.
One of the challenges that we've had with that location is that it's really not near services, social services that those populations would need or would benefit from.
Yeah.
So that's been, I mean, we've tried with this particular home.
Mhm.
So I agree. I would like to see a pretty concrete plan if that's what's going to happen.
And we have just solicited it to a few families that we have contact with that are stable and are improving, and their first reaction is it's too far away.
Mhm.
But again, with Safe Families, they've developed a community. So I can see that being a negative, right? Being able to transition somebody directly from Safe Families into this might be difficult, but I also, you know, maybe they don't have to go through Safe Families. Maybe they can just be a solid family that wants to enter into a market that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And it puts them at risk of possibly trying to work two jobs. You know, and if their desire is to be a family and enter a market that they wouldn't be able to enter, we'd love to see that happen.
The concern with that is, and through Affordable Housing Corporation, we see a lot of that going on where they'll basically take a property, rehab it, and then it's sold for below market value.
Right.
But to do that independently of an existing program, I think might be difficult for us. So unless we can say we honestly have a safe family that's gone through the program, or a Provoking Hope client who's gone through the program, who would then qualify to
Right.
move into it, to say, you know, it's something we'd like to see done. So we would have to have, I think, a little more
Right.
information.
I think I would propose talking with Kathy Ann with Lutheran
Okay.
Family Services,
Sure.
because she has more awareness of a broader spectrum than we have. We only have the families that we currently are in contact with and we are working with. So we also have someone, you know, we have contacts that are realtors. So that would be, you know, that are friends that would be able to work with our goal as well. And it would probably be like a rent to own thing, so that their rent money is going towards the purchase value of their home. I don't have the legals laid out yet or how that contract would look. But I don't know, if market value is 300,000 on a house, then maybe when they reached you know, more than half, then we could start turning a deed over, you know. So it would be definitely a hand-holding scenario of home ownership, that they would take care of their utilities. There would be certain requirements in doing that. That's my rough idea. I have a better idea of the breakdown of the construction and how that will be the renovation. We have looked at the house. And I could give you a timeline for that, but I would either need help from Lutheran Family Services or a realtor in order to make a viable plan. That's just our idea right now.
If you could have Kathy Ann contact us,
Sure.
give us some specifics. I think we would need a little bit more than that at this
Yeah.
point. Perhaps work through either the Affordable Housing Corporation if there's more detail you need, or at least let us have a little bit more,
Yeah.
because I think at this point, it might be a little bit too
To,
soon.
yeah.
But yeah, if we can.
Would you like Kathy Ann to address the entire council or just one person?
Well, I've been in touch with Kathy Ann over the years, so if she wants to get a hold of me, I can share it with our administrator, who can share it with the board and with our county council office to look at whether or not this is feasible.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. I'll
What's the-
contact
Thank
her
you.
today.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. What's the time frame for responding to the other bidders?
That's a good board. If you want to put it on next week's agenda, I'll have Noelle email each of them today. And just ask for basic levels information. If you, I guess it depends on how much information you want.
Well, that's the thing. It sounds like it's going to take longer than a week to gather information to decide what we're going to do with
Mhm.
TBD.
I'm thinking a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We would
Okay.
bring it back.
Okay. Okay. Do you want that same level of information from the other three, or is just a base level? Can you tell us what you plan to do with the property enough?
I don't know that we've asked for that before.
No. Well, no.
So it
haven't.
feels a little awkward.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at this point in the process when it's been through an auction and no one's bid, and then we've gotten
Yeah.
some sealed bids. We haven't delved that deeply. We did, as it's been discussed, have reached out to any number of profits, the folks that you've referred to and folks that we've talked to in the past. So we have sort of been through that process. Doesn't mean we can't continue to have that conversation, but no, we haven't usually asked for that kind of information at this stage.
I think I would like to set it up over for a couple weeks and then just maybe review the submittals.
Okay, I can just send the board.
letter.
Yeah, I'll definitely send the letter and then I'll
Okay.
just send a brief. Here's what we got and from who.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Will you contact those who have, or perhaps the highest bidder and say that we have had a discussion? Is that something process wise we would need to?
We can do that for sure. We can reach out to each of them and say the decision's still pending.
Well, it is in regards to the highest bidder. I don't know that it is germane to the other bidders.
Do you want me to reach out and just flat out reject the other ones?
Well, there's been no formal action taken by the board at this
Yeah.
point. There was consensus of the board to prepare the next step, but now that has changed in wanting to set this over. So there hasn't been any action taken by the board on this item.
So it's still pending.
It's still pending. The question that I would have is, was there a deadline associated with submitting bids, or is it still open in case? And if we get more bids between now and a decision from 2 weeks,
So the only deadline is the deadline in policy, which is just an internal logistical deadline of if you get it to me, to our office. I think it's before Friday at noon. We'll get it on the next week's agenda. Otherwise it'll have to go on the week after, but that's the only deadline. And this property is not posted on the internet, which I think was what happened with the last round when we were getting last minute bids. So I don't know how many other people would submit a bid, but I don't know.
But technically the deadline hasn't passed. Folks could.
There is no
submit it if they
deadline.
wanted, right?
Yeah. These are just,
but the board could close to any further bids right now as an action. If the board was satisfied with the proposal to have been submitted, it's just whether or not what action you're going to take on what's submitted. We could close it right now.
Sure.
I guess, I don't know. Sure.
I would always like to leave my options open, so I wouldn't want to close it down. Especially, I mean, everybody else knows now what the bid prices are, so.
Right.
Okay.
And in the meantime, we can review the proposal.
Okay,
That's
so we
fine.
will leave them open
Leave it open, continued for 2 weeks.
and continue it for June 29th.
And I will just say that exactly because they will ask us what happened. So I'm just gonna say this was continued for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, great.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, item I3, consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Willamina School District to provide behavioral health counseling for the 2023-24 school year, not to exceed $64,409.91. Effective September 2023 through May of 2024.
And this would add 1 FTE to the Willamina School District. That's full time.
Mhm.
And I would move approval.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. I4, consideration of approval of proposed 2023-24 Health and Human Services Behavioral Health Usual and Customary Rates, Public Health Clinic Rates, and Environmental Health Fees effective July 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2024.
So these rates are basically for the clinic and environmental health, public health rates increased about 4%. Nurse practitioner, medical doctor, 4%, and environmental health, 3 to 5%. Should note that the majority of those services are covered by insurance. Anyone who isn't covered by insurance is, there's a sliding scale available. And a lot of these are set by the state. So
Right.
I would move approval.
Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. Item I5, consideration of approval of a contract employee agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Erica Ronquillo to provide professional psychiatric behavioral health services at a rate of $80 per hour effective June 24th, 2023 through June 30th of 2024 with an auto renewal option. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. Okay, before we get into McMinnville fire issues, I want to take a 5-minute break and we will be right back. Okay, we are back in our June 15th, 2023 formal session. It is 10:52. And we are picking up at item I6, which is consideration of approval of amendment number 1 to an intergovernmental agreement between Yamhill County and the city of McMinnville regarding out-of-pocket costs and expenses incurred with the formation proceedings and election for the creation of a new McMinnville Fire District. And this was continued from June 8th last week of 2023. So commissioners, you have the IGA amendment in your packet. We have added language under section 4 that is a bit more specific in terms of some of our concerns going forward. This feels a little bit like cart before the horse, or we should have the entire discussion together, but we really should consider this first before we proceed. It's whether the vote goes through or not, this few questions, Christian. When in section 4.1, when you refer to third party, a third party can be a voter, taxpayer within the district or the city.
Third party claim, yeah.
That's pretty much anyone who has standing. Okay.
Mhm.
And then the last part that was added, let's see, after 4.1 subsection 4, it says, however, that in the event the county does not tender defense of third-party claims to the city and chooses to pursue its own defense of such third-party claims, the city shall not be required to reimburse county for any loss or cost that is paid by or recovered from the coverage or proceeds of insurance maintained by the county.
That's
So if
right.
you could just clarify what that means in layman's
Sure.
terms.
So if a third party claim were to arise relating to or arising out of the mapping error, what I would expect to have happen is the county would say, well, city, you've agreed to hold us harmless for those claims, so we're going to tender that claim to you. And then the city would be responsible for defending that claim or working with the claimant to resolve their issue. If for whatever reason, the county decided not to tender that defense to the city and we decided to deal with that claim on our own and say we handed that off to CIS and CIS covers those costs, we wouldn't then go back to the city asking for them to reimburse us or CIS for the costs that had been incurred. But that would only be if the county made an affirmative choice not to tender that claim to the city.
Does that make
help?
sense?
Follow-up question on
Sure.
that. Does that then add to any of our deductible woes that we have?
You know, it's really hard to know. I think every time we like most folks, every time you call your insurance provider, I think there is a concern that the more you make use of your insurance coverage, the more expensive that coverage might be. I wouldn't expect this claim or a claim like this to necessarily have a significant impact on our overall premiums or insurance costs.
I do have another question, Chair. This has to do with the legal opinion that was sent to us. Eileen
Mhm.
Akins, where she talked about it is possible that property owners who could show specific harm as a result of the mapping discrepancy could bring a legal action against the county, but the county's monetary liability exposure would likely be minimal.
Mhm.
So that seems a bit vague. Do we have anything that puts some guardrails on what that might be?
No, I
Or
don't
any
think so.
kind of estimate or anything beyond, but it would be minimal. Minimal meaning what? That's relative.
Yeah, I mean, other than to say she believes it would be a relatively small dollar amount. And in the event a claim like that came forward, the discussion we would have is under the terms of our IGA with the city, we would tender the defense of that claim to the city. So in that sense, even though the county, there might be damages, if the damages are minimal, if the county is named, what we would probably do is tender that to the city, then the city would hold us harmless for that. So in the event someone was able to prove any sort of minimal damages or even slightly higher, our expectation would be that the city would be responsible for those, not the county.
Thank you.
So when this issue came up, I believe that was around April.
One other thing I should say, if what their damages are based on is, so the way this indemnification and hold harmless works is we've each indemnified each other for our own respective actions. So as long as the claim is one arising out of something that the city was responsible for and not something that the county was responsible for, then I think we would tender that defense to the city.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
And this is predicated on the expectation that the city is taking responsibility for the mapping errors.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected by this amendment.
Okay. So there's no wiggle room there. If a claim does come forward,
Well, again, we don't
Right.
know what the claims might look like. You know, litigation is always hard to anticipate. Folks, name the county and parties in actions all the time. But as far as we can tell and what we've thought through so far, yeah, I'm not aware of any claims that are pending or that we're aware that anyone is intending to bring. But again, if a third party claim arose arising out of the mapping error and what's described in this amendment, our position would be that it would be the city's responsibility under our IGA to hold the county harmless and defend the county against those claims.
so I believe we can talk about the memo.
So yeah, it was an attorney-client privilege document, but the privilege rests with the board. If the board wants to talk about the memo and thereby making the memo a public record, you can do that.
Okay. I want to talk about it because it is germane to the reason why we asked for this
Mhm.
and for special counsel.
Mhm.
And the reason is that the county has jurisdictional power over this proceeding, the whole process from start to finish. And when the mapping errors came forward in, I believe that was late April, there were some immediate concerns that once we figured out that the clerical errors were not clerical fixes were not an option, that there was exposure and liability. I think that we have boiled down the exposure to two different things. One is that a voter could claim that there was a fatal flaw in the measure or the process based on what was found out later on, after the ballots had already been out. And the second main concern is that any one of these affected properties of the 251 properties, or now these 6 or 7 parcels that we've further identified, could come forward and say that they have been harmed in the sense that their insurance has been affected. So they've either been denied insurance or financially impacted by higher insurance rates. So I watched the McMinnville City Council meeting from Tuesday night, and they did have this discussion out loud because they are concerned as well about legal exposure. Ultimately, they did sign off on this unanimously to take responsibility for any of these potential claims. But after these mapping errors were discovered, I think that from the county's perspective, number one, we want to know that we did the process correctly, because that is within our purview. And so it's great to see from special counsel that she reviewed the entire process that the county was in control of and everything was done correctly. In addition to the fact that we didn't have to hold a special session, but we did in order to get the information out to the voters as quickly as possible once we found out that there was no fix available
Before the election. Yeah.
before the election. So I think that further protects the county from any type of claim that we somehow didn't do the election process the right way. And I would add that our clerk, Carrie Hinton, was on the phone to the Secretary of State right away to make sure that this whole thing was above board and we were doing everything correctly. The other piece of it is these affected properties. And even though so far, and we'll get into this discussion next, but even though so far I have not been able to find any exposure for these property owners in terms of insurance impacts, doesn't mean there isn't one.
Sure.
But it was imperative, at least from my perspective, for me to feel comfortable voting on this today, to get it into an IGA where the city takes responsibility for the mapping errors and the errors in the legal descriptions. That was their job. It wasn't asked of the county. And that we protect our taxpayers, even though they overlap, but we do everything in our power to protect our taxpayers from potential legal liability and claims. So that's why this came about. I'm glad that we did make the decision to reach out to Eileen, because I think with her expertise in special districts that she was able to really nail it,
Yeah, it was very helpful.
mhm,
Was.
and help us
And
even
just to
draft.
point out too, to remind folks that the city has made a number of statements and the new potential district board members have also made statements about the fact that they're going to ensure that any of the folks who are impacted by the error are going to continue to receive fire and EMS services. So hopefully that will help alleviate some of those concerns if and when they should arise.
So that's where we're at on this. I have to say, though, that I am extremely frustrated that we were finding additional properties that were affected by mapping errors as late as the end of last week. And that was being done by our staff. The double checking process was being done by our staff. Jason Foos, our surveyor, and Brian Hansberry, our senior cartographer, Derek, all these folks were getting, their sets of eyes on this process and finding additional errors in the 11th hour. So, when you watch the McMinnville City Council meeting, there was reference to not receiving the full sort of completed file until 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. That is not how we like to do things. It's concerning to me that we have found now 7 additional parcels that have been impacted. And I just am kind of incredulous at that. So are there any further comments, concerns, discussion around the IGA specifically, and then we can get into some of the rest of it in the next item?
Well, Chair, regarding this, the special counsel analysis, one of the things that was really important to me to see, and it was very helpful, so I appreciate your asking for that, and I appreciate your finding this particular attorney. Because she says, because voters nearly always have the final say on the matters decided at the properly held election, there's credible argument that the board's final formation order should confirm the boundary map approved by voters and acknowledge the discrepancy in the maps as a clerical oversight. Originally, my conversations with county council were that I would absolutely not feel that it was acceptable for us to, after the fact, sort of repair what was an error, and by acting as if we were taking a giant eraser and making it go away. So I was pretty much bound and determined that I couldn't, agree to this, but I think her analysis makes it clear that that's not the case, that voters will have the final say, and for us to do anything other than that, in my estimation, would present a whole nother set of problems. So here we are.
Right, and I think it's clear in her memo too, though, that the language that the county submitted to the voters and put in front of the voters was accurate. The intent of it was accurate. The language was accurate. Therefore, we did what we needed to do to make sure that voters knew exactly what they were voting on.
Yeah, I think that was very important that the correct information was before voters. And as far as we can tell, everyone who was supposed to receive a ballot with the proper question on the ballot did receive a ballot with the right question. And the map that was in the voters pamphlet was accurate, and the summary statements and the explanatory statements that were in the voters pamphlet were also accurate about the intent of both the dissolution and the formation.
Okay, well, I'm going to move approval of item I6 so that we can, for me, it's a necessary precursor to the following discussion. Was it I6? Yes, I6. Any other discussion?
None.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the amendment number 1 to the IGA between Yamhill County and the city of McMinnville, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. All right. So that brings us to item I7, which is consideration of approval in the matter of a final order establishing and forming the McMinnville Fire District and directing the clerk to issue certificates of election to the persons receiving the highest number of votes for the McMinnville Fire District Board. So commissioners, this will officially establish the, if approved, it will officially establish the fire district as of
Yeah, it's a little
June
interesting. The
30th?
timing is, June 30th, because the statute
11/30.
says prior to July 1. So, and this is consistent with the other board orders that have been before the board throughout the formation process that says it will take effect on June 30th, 2023 at 11:30 p.m.
And this will also officially certify those 5 individuals as the new board as
Correct.
well. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a bit of a lengthy, complicated conversation. I guess I can start if you're okay with that. I'll kind of walk you through how I am arriving at my decision and how we got here. I want to go back to, when the mapping errors were first discovered. They were first discovered by a voter who contacted our county clerk, who then acted immediately in notifying county council and those involved, and also notified the Secretary of State about the issue. There were about 2 weeks, I believe, that passed before we had our special session, if my memory is
Yeah, and during that
serving.
time, we were reaching out to the Department of Revenue
Right.
to try to determine if the mapping error could be corrected or not.
Right. So during that time, and I don't know that Commissioner Johnston or Commissioner Sterrett were on those emails or privy to those communications, but during that time, there was constant back and forth communication between county council, between the city's special counsel, Mr. Stone, and Derek Wharf, our assessor, and myself. I was and the clerk, Carrie, as to was there a clerical fix possible for this? Is this something that rises to the level of a fatal flaw in the election? There's a whole slew of questions that we were trying to answer. One of the things that came forward that was very frustrating is that when we decided that or found out that there was no clerical fix available, we immediately said that voters need to know this information so that we are satisfying our obligations as a county. That's why we called the special session, to inform the public. And as a courtesy, I made phone calls to the city in the fire department folks that we were going to do so. It was very clear that they were not aware of the problem. So I want to clear up some misunderstanding that the county was not withholding information. In fact, we were constantly communicating through Christian with special counsel for the city, and assumed, and I don't know why we wouldn't have assumed, but assumed that county special counsel was communicating with his city manager and the city council and the mayor at the very least. So, I've gotten some feedback that the county withheld the information. No, we did not. We were making sure that special counsel was very much aware of the conversations that we were having. After the special session that we had in informing the voters as to what the problem was, there was a lot of negative feedback, a lot of frustration, understandably so. Mistakes happen, they're not pleasant, but in hindsight, that was a pretty critical decision for this board to make, because one of the concerns legally in terms of claims is that the county did not do everything that we should have done to ensure a fair and free election. So in hindsight, I think that was a very critical move that the board made in order to get that information out to the voters as soon as possible, when we were sure that there was no fix available. The election happened. Obviously, both measures passed. We support the will of the voters, period. They overwhelmingly passed both measures. However, there was a lot of frustration after the election, and some misunderstandings and assumptions that were made. After the dust kind of settled a little bit, I did reach out and I met with Council President Adam Garvin and the Union President Todd Godfrey, and just kind of laid out all of our frustrations and concerns and started working towards solutions that, from my perspective, I felt were necessary to check the boxes for, to make sure that we've done everything that we can to protect our constituents, our taxpayers, especially the folks that are impacted by the mapping errors. Part of that discussion was the necessity to amend the IGA to make sure that mapping errors and legal descriptions that were erroneous are not going to impact county taxpayers, because we were not responsible for them. In my opinion, that's just part of our due diligence of protecting our taxpayers from legal exposure. That's why I also asked for the special counsel, to make sure that the laws are very clear to us as to not only what our obligations are in response to a valid public vote, but also in protecting our constituents. I did ask for a letter to be mailed to all of those 251 affected properties, informing them of the problem and asking them to contact their insurance companies immediately to see if there was going to be any negative impact. I was very grateful to Council President Garvin and Mayor Drabkin for signing that letter with me. That letter went out, I believe, within 2 or 3 days. So it was a quick turnaround, and I'm very grateful for their support. I did not receive any direct feedback from any of the affected property owners. In a brief conversation with Council President Garvin, he did receive a few inquiries, but so far no issues with insurance. So nobody's reporting any insurance issues. And I believe Mayor Drabkin did receive one inquiry back. In addition to that, I have personally called at least 4 insurance companies, USAA, Farmers, State Farm, and Hagen Hamilton, to ask them how they determine insurance rates in terms of fire service or fire districts. And every single one of them said that this issue was not going to be a problem for them. Now, again, I'm only speaking for 4 of them, but Hagen Hamilton in particular went through and took some time with me and described exactly how they assess fire rates or insurance rates and how that factors into their insurance rates. And so not only was there no concern and no impact there, but they also made some very helpful recommendations in terms of what homeowners can do or property owners can do to help mitigate any question. And we'll get to that in a second. During this meeting, I asked that the city take responsibility for the errors. So far, I have not seen any formal issuance of that, but I hope that's at least assumed. I also asked our staff to review all of the mapping and legal description boundaries to make sure that what we are approving today in terms of our exhibits are 100% correct and accurate. Our staff has done that. And as part of that process, they did find a few additional errors. I'm glad we found them. But, I just have to say that I just want to thank that. I know Jason is watching. I don't know if Brian's watching, but these individuals, this was not their job. It wasn't on their calendar to do, but they dropped everything. They've been reviewing these maps. They're very complicated. It's a lot of work, and they did an excellent job. And I just want to thank them for their time because they were on it. We asked a lot of them and they were on it. I also asked that the new fire district board, if seated, would be willing to offer a service contract with any affected property owner so that they could enter into a formal contract and pay for service, for fire service, just to make sure that if there was any concern, that they would have a contractual statement to show their insurance company that says, I'm actually paying into this district as well. We received confirmation from the attorney, Eileen Akins, that a special district can enter into service contracts either within the boundary or even outside of the boundary. So that's within their purview to do so. And I would recommend that that be an option. I also reiterated that that we would potentially be very involved. I know from my perspective, I will be very involved in future discussions on what to do with the existing $1.50 per thousand that is currently going towards fire service within the city. I don't support backdoor property tax increases on families in McMinnville, and I will be at the forefront of that future discussion. I don't think Councillor Garvin was surprised to hear that. But we support public votes. If the city supported a public vote for a fire district formation, then the city should support a public vote for what to do with bringing back any part of that $1.50. So that is my expectation going forward, and I will be involved in that conversation. So that pretty much covers some of the work that I've been doing over the past few weeks to try and get to the point where I feel comfortable doing this. I don't feel like we've left any stone unturned in terms of working to protect the affected property owners and mitigating any sort of legal risk. And frankly, a lot of the work that we've done is going to benefit the city as well. So that's where I'm at right now. Any further discussion or comments, questions about anything I've said?
Just my biggest concerns were always insurance from the very beginning.
Yep.
And make sure that wasn't affected. And then my second concern was always if we didn't end up certifying for some reason, that actually put us in a bigger bind. And so I think for the
Mhm.
most part, I'm happy with how everything's turning out.
Yeah, I appreciate the work, Chair and County Council on this. I know it's been kind of stressful, with all those who were supportive of this and championing this. But I think really at the end of the day, all of the work really does go show that there's nothing left the county could do at this point that hasn't been done. And so that's why I feel more comfortable, because at the beginning I was a hard no on this.
Well, and I've been joking with others too, that if this is approved by the board, I think we'll probably have the most closely scrutinized, carefully mapped out boundary of any district in the state, which is great. And it's good. And it's taken some time, but I think we've ended up in the right place, and hopefully we've addressed, and we've certainly tried to address all of the questions that the board had and questions that the cities had, and anticipating what other issues could come out of this. And again, like you said, the work of the clerk and the assessor and surveyor have all been super helpful.
Yeah, and Christian, I mean, you've put a ton of time in this,
Yeah.
into this, so I appreciate that. And just being responsive to all of our concerns. They were multifaceted, so. I've already thanked our assessor team, Derek and Brian, Jason, and obviously Carrie. Carrie was, her instincts are great. She knew exactly what to do in terms of making sure the Secretary of State was right alongside her in ensuring that we had a solid election. And again, I want to thank Council President Garvin for coming to the table and listening to concerns and venting and frustration and all of it. And Todd, your help as well. There's one more person I want to thank, former Commissioner Dennis Gex. He has been involved in this process from day one. He probably won't agree with the decision that we make today. That's okay. He has offered his insight, advice, his thoughtful leadership. I truly appreciate it. He has come into my office and prayed for us in my office because he knows this is a difficult decision and we were being bombarded with all sorts of things. And I just value his involvement so much and wanted to formally thank him on record. Okay, so commissioners, going back to mention, I will move approval of the final board order establishing and forming the McMinnville Fire District and directing the clerk to issue certificates of election to the persons receiving the highest number of votes for the McMinnville Fire District Board. And those individuals are Brian Smith, Daniel Sparrow, Josh Traff, Ray Pratt, and Adam Garvin. Do I need to read the board order? Okay. All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. And so as of June 30th at 11:30, we will have a new McMinnville Fire District.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Rich Lightfoot from the McMinnville Fire
Welcome,
Department.
Chief.
Thank you.
Chief.
I would like to take the time to thank the commissioners and the county staff for all of their support through this process. We recognize it was a very arduous process. Some of that was of my own doing, and I apologize for the problems it created for the process. But I do want to say thank you for your support and doing what I think is the best for the community. And we're going to do the best we can to make this a good organization. So thank you for your
Great.
support.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
All right. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Okay, so item. Actually, let me make sure. Got sure. Okay. So now we are on to item I8, consideration of approval for a letter of support for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde hunting and fishing agreement. This is for the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting that is tomorrow. They would like this by the end of today, close of business today. I did notice a typo in the letter, though. I think Grand, in the second paragraph, Grand has an E on the end of it, so we just need to strike that off. But otherwise, I would move approval of item I8.
And Chair, just a clarification here, and I want to thank Carolina for wordsmithing a letter we did receive kind of short notice.
Yeah.
But over the past 2 years, I guess, 5 different tribes have been entering into negotiations with ODFW, and this is just the latest. They've been working on similar agreements, so they just wanted that letter of support from us, and we've worked well with the tribe in the past, so.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, any further discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. So we'll get that edited and out the door by before 5. And we have the contact info for that. for
Yeah,
the
Caroline has
Stacia
done
thing.
all the due diligence that can possibly be done on this letter, so I
right.
appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, so item J is our public hearing. J1 is receipt of public comment on the 2023-24 county budget. And I just want to acknowledge that we have received some written comment so far via emails. And if anyone here is seeking to provide public comment on the budget, please come forward. Kim, come on forward. And then if you're online, please raise your virtual hand and we will call on you. Welcome. If you could state your name and address for the record.
My name is Kim Morris. I live at 935 Northwest 19th Street here in McMinnville. I'm a local business person, but I'm also the co-founder of McMinnville Community Task Force. I'm here today just to offer my concerns and support for our Sheriff's Department, Corrections Department, and District Attorney. As leader of the Community Task Force, we have over 1,600 people in the last 3 months that have joined on about our concerns with bad behavior, criminal activity, drug use, theft, vandalism. I could go on, but we have a lot of problems in our county and in our town. And I know a lot of it can come through bad decisions made from the state, but we have to deal with those. And the calls that we have increased to Yamhill County. I know YCOM is filling at dispatch because we're encouraging our county and our town to speak up. We need to do what we can do to stop these actions happening in our town. We do not want to become a Portland, a Eugene. And it's very concerning to me, and to understand that there may be a cut in their services to the Corrections Department and to the Sheriff's Department is something that concerns me. So does local PD. I don't want cuts there either. So all I would say is I want to voice my concern and let you know that the minimum expectation anybody in this county has is that if I need help and I call dispatch and I need a Sheriff's Department deputy to respond, my minimum expectation is that they respond and that the person that is doing the crime is held accountable. So please consider that when you look at your budgets.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public testimony in the audience or online regarding the proposed budget for 23-24? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we will move into kind of a general discussion about some changes. Okay.
All right, now, as we've typically done, each year, we always wait to see if there's any public comment or requests or anything that would update that deliberation list. Again, today, we're not looking to adopt the budget today.
Mhm.
This is budget adoption is scheduled for June 29th. And so as we do with each phase in the process, we do have some changes that we've been working on. And there's a couple lists, there's several lists and documents in the record in the packet that we've put together. You know, having changes is not unusual either because again, putting together the budget is, well, I started working on preparing this budget in October of last year. So it's a pretty extensive process. And then with all the department heads and all of their work that they do on those budgets, we do see changes in between budget committee and final budget adoption as we start getting more clarity from revenues, agreements. Of course, we're still pending a state budget that is going to tell us what we're going to see for state grant and aid in for Department of Community Justice, and then also other items that may be coming through OHA and et cetera. But we do have a list of changes. I've put together a tracker of and it looks a little bit different this year because of the discussions that we've been having around the sheriff's office. And so when you look at the two spreadsheets, you're going to see an option 1 and an option 2. And really the difference between the two options is what we do for the sheriff's budget, and in particular with patrol and the jail. So based on the last couple of discussions, so the first in option 1, what you're going to see there is essentially a zeroing out of all the budgeted ending balances in emergency management, patrol, jail, court security, and then moving those funds to restore 2 vacant deputy positions in the jail, and then moving the balance of that into personnel expense lines. I don't believe there's sufficient funds to cover restoration of a position, but at least we could fully appropriate those funds in personnel lines to make sure that they're available as needed. Because in conversations with the sheriff, we are going to need the funds. We still have a pending collective bargaining agreement with Teamsters that still hasn't been settled yet. You know, so he is going to need those funds. And then in option 2, so based on, I want to say this was last week, the discussion, the board had asked that I go and do an analysis of general fund departments and look at ending balances or where there may be some room to do some discretionary allocations, recognizing that departments may have more savings and could handle a modification to the discretionary allocation to move it over to the sheriff's budget to restore 3 positions. What I did in order to accomplish that is, again, I only looked at general fund departments and on how we could reallocate the discretionary allocations, because anything outside of that, you start getting into restricted funds, and we can't just move funds from HHS or public works or some of those categories into the sheriff's budget because they're not discretionary funds, they're restricted funds. So in doing that analysis, I really looked at general fund departments. I looked at general fund departments that had ending balances that were budgeted of more than $150,000. I looked at the diversity of their revenues that are coming in, and looked at where some of those cost savings were coming in and whether or not the department could handle those cost savings. And so what you'll see is in the adjustments, I did come up with being able to pull funds from a combination of places. One, from 1002, which is the discretionary that's going to reduce the reserve for the future by 100,000. Taking $40,000 of ending balance from admin, reducing contingency by 50,000, taking that down to 200,000, which I feel comfortable in doing that at this point. reducing the clerk's budget by 10,000. I know the county clerk has submitted a memo to the board with some concerns around that. And what I'll do is I'll circle back and speak to that directly. County council's budget, 40,000. And then also making the same changes that I said before on adjusting the ending balances and fully appropriating the ending balances in emergency management, court security, patrol, and jail. And together with those came up with the amount that could restore 3 deputy positions. And I did 1 in patrol and 2 in the jail. And there are some additional funds above and beyond that, also recognizing that the current status of the jail medical contract and what we're dealing with and trying to have some funds. So then my recommendation in the second option is any surplus funds that are not needed to support the positions would go towards the jail medical contract. But I would also add that because these are vacant positions, when they're actually filled, I don't know exactly at what level. Are these going to be entry level positions or laterals? And so the numbers that I was using in calculating on how much funds were going to be here was mid-range, but a little leaning higher because we have been seeing a lot of laterals, but it does give the sheriff some flexibility in filling those positions. Because again, these are all vacant positions that were cut. As far as specific with some of the concerns, because I did reach out to all the departments and advise them of this option so they wouldn't be surprised and just learn of it this morning that I'm looking at they're going to see an impact to their ending balance. And I do recognize that the county clerk has raised some concerns about that. The one thing that I would highlight is especially for the clerk's budget, one of the reasons I looked at this is I have a long history of working with the current clerk and the past clerk on building those budgets. Very diverse revenue. The general fund allocation is actually relatively small that goes in. They get 70, I don't know the number right off the top of my head, just over $70,000. And the rest of the clerk's budget is made up of fees and other revenues that come in for the services that they provide. And they have a pretty significant ending balance. And again, this is a discretionary allocation for this next fiscal year. As another commissioner puts it very eloquently, I'm just trying to get the donkey out of the ditch at this point. So that's what this solution is. And so this would be a one-time reduction in order to balance and help restore those positions. But going into next fiscal year, I would put those numbers back in and realizing that we still have a long-term discussion that we need to have as far as the sheriff's office budget goes. But right now, I'm just trying to get this budget to the finish line and trying to make sure we can operate over the next fiscal year. And I think the clerk's budget can handle this reduction. There's been quite a bit of vacancy savings with the transition that the office has been going through and several positions being open. But I do recognize that the clerk has concerns. I also recognize that every one of the departments that have been working with here, those are one-time, we're basically taking one-time cost savings or cost savings that those departments have been having, and we're taking it and shifting it to another department to help fill a gap. I want to make sure this doesn't set precedents or concern that now departments are, well, I need to spend it because otherwise if I save it, my funds are going to get diverted to another department who, this is just me saying, I'm not saying this, that maybe aren't being as conservative as I am with my funds. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here. I'm just saying that could be a perception and a concern moving forward. And I don't want to be in that situation. At the same time, based on our discussions, the board asked for me to look for a solution to restore 3 deputy positions, and this is what I was able to come up with at this point. Now, I will say if there is concerns about the clerk's budget and with the concerns that she's presented, the $10,000 is not going to make or break. We could back that out and not necessarily take from that. But again, just a reminder that the funds, it's not really a contribution that the clerk or admin or anyone is making to the sheriff's office. We're all part of the same county. We're all general fund. These are all discretionary revenues that come into the county, and we disperse them out to the departments to help cover services and operations. And I just want to recognize that, again, this is a reallocation of funds for the next fiscal year. So that was a lot, and I spent a lot of time talking about the specific sheriff's office area. If you have questions about the other items that are on the list, I'm more than happy. If you want me to go over it now and kind of go through the list, I'm happy to. Or if you just want to, and it's kind of up to you on how you want to approve this. In the past, you've typically approved the whole list in one group, or if you want to do this one by one, it's completely up to the board. And I'll stop talking and entertain questions.
So the main difference between option 1 and option 2 is that option 2 uses parts of ending balances from other departments, as opposed to using the ending balances completely from the sheriff's departments.
And it restores 1 additional position. The option 1 only restores 2 positions. And even that, I think it's going to be tight. I don't think they'll be able to fill 1 of those positions, but zeroing out those ending balances based on my forecasts, you know, again, with a very conservative approach on which positions and what they might be total cost, it'll fill 2 positions, whereas the second category will fill 3 positions, and there's additional funds to help offset any, you know, any difference and for those positions, and adds funds for the jail medical contract. So it's about $70-some thousand of additional funds above and beyond the 3 positions that would go for the jail medical contract. But again, that's not restricted if there's more of a need for the 3 positions because of the, if they came in hired as laterals and more expensive positions, those funds would be available to cover that.
So are we talking about the clerk and county council are the only 2 that are non-sheriff's departments?
Admin, contingency, 1002, county council,
And the
and the
clerk?
clerk are the ones that, in doing the budgetary review, had the ending balances that could accommodate what dollar amounts that I have here to pull out. This isn't taking their full ending balance,
Right,
because as
right.
an example, you know, admin, for example, we have currently budgeted $141,000 ending balance.
Mhm.
I'm going to reduce it by 40,000.
I see that, yeah.
And then same thing goes, the clerk's office currently has a $201,000 budgeted ending balance. That'll take it to 191.
So we are admin. In discretionary and contingency is also sort of, you know, something under our purview. If we were to remove the clerk and the county council and go find $50,000 somewhere else, is that an option?
It is, it depends
Further-
on where you want to take it. I'm trying to also preserve, I want to be, I mean, because you could take it from 1002. And
That's discretionary, right?
that's discretionary, and that would take, right now, we have reserved for the future at 1,167,000. I already have that coming, 100,000 coming off of that. This is the one that I think everyone knows, this is our operational reserve.
Mhm.
So this is one of the funds that we have. It's an operational reserve that is fully discretionary. I think it can handle it, but I'm not excited about that concept. I do think, like I said before, I feel comfortable with the amounts that are coming out of those funds from 1002, from county council, from the clerk's office. There's budgeted ending balances, which shows that there were cost savings, and I think they can handle and support what's being proposed.
The contingency fund, is that the insurance?
Contingency, it's a general operating contingency. We, for each year, we try to make sure we have funds budgeted, and there's a lot of restrictions and rules around how we can access or spend those contingency funds. So, and historically, we've always had $200,000 to $250,000 available in contingency, and it's there to use in case of an emergency, as long as it satisfies the statutory requirements of using a contingency funds. We can spend those. We don't have a ton of history of accessing those funds. We have in the past, but I feel comfortable reducing that to 200,000. We have additional contingencies in insurance reserve for covering liability and those types of contingency issues.
And discretionary is the fund that you do not like to go under $1 million.
Correct. Correct.
But I do, I read the clerk's memo. It's a very thoughtful memo. I think it provides a lot of history and some frustration over this particular problem. And I do think it's fair to say that the public expects that their elected officials are going to manage their own budgets. I mean, ultimately, the Board of Commissioners is responsible for triaging what might be going wrong, but there is an expectation that elected officials are supposed to be managing their budgets wisely and spending funds wisely, right? And so if you get into a position where we're now sort of pooling resources because we have, a continuous drain on the system, that's a problem going forward if the county clerk cannot, like she described, can't buy certain things that enable her to perform an election that she's required to perform, right? And then it starts to reflect on them, which is not fair. So that's my concern about including other departments. Obviously, the administrative budget, we've talked about needing additional supports. We approved an additional support system or person. We've talked about needing a communications person, and that continuously comes up as a problem. We can say that we have to prioritize one department over the rest of them, but the reality is that this county provides a lot of service and function to our constituents that is outside of law enforcement. So this is a delicate balance, and I just want to make sure that we're not setting a precedent here by taking these funds out of other departments.
And the other thing that I would just share, because I know when I get departments, and I recognize you get certain degree of being territorial around wanting to protect your ending balances and your spending and things like that. But we're already there. We already have these discussions when we figure out the discretionary allocation each year. That's one of the first things we do to kick off the budget process. Just recognizing that for this year, what had made things a little more challenging is all departments had already taken a 2% reduction to their discretionary allocation. And, the hard part is, that the sheriff has several, is one of our largest departments in the county, is heavily reliant on discretionary funds. That 2% cut had an impact on top of the personnel costs and those increases that are, we got revenues heading in the wrong direction and with costs. So, so right now, for the last 6 months, we've already been having those discussions on kind of that shared responsibility and how do we prioritize where those funds are going. And I know it's a difficult discussion to have each year. And this conversation's not done because again, this, like I said, this proposal and what we have here is to ensure come July 1 and into the new year that we're able to operate and restore those positions. And then the other questions that I have, and hopefully there'll be some cost savings, or I'm not sure how that's all going to play out, is the projections that I did for the 3 positions that I have funded that's funded for the entire year. That's if somebody comes into the position on July 1 and through the whole year. So not knowing where they're at with the hiring process or filling these positions, if there's any cost savings or anything realized from that, again, I tried to lean, towards the top end of the scale, but also realizing that this could be, I'm not sure what
Yeah.
the turnaround time would be that these positions would actually be
Right.
filled.
Sounded like it was unlikely because Tim had guys lined up ready to take those positions.
So.
Month or two.
Couple of things. I read the clerk's memo and her points are well taken. I think it shows some frustration with the fact that, okay, there's a projection of what might be needed down the road, and it's significant amounts of money that are going to be needed to address ranked choice voting, if that's the case. And I mean, these are, then what does she do? So I get that. I also, her point is well taken about if one elected official is giving money to another elected official, and how does, what kind of a precedent are we setting with that? And then also, if you look at how, I'm going to go with the budget that I know, and that is in admin and the commissioner's budget and what we have chosen to do, which is really bare bones. And I think it really speaks to a respect for taxpayer money, down to the littlest thing, whether it's a lunch, whether it's a cup of coffee. There is such a fidelity to every dime comes out of someone else's pocket. We don't have it unless we take it from someone else. And so that is where I feel like there's always room to tighten the belt. And we've talked about this, or I've talked about this in terms of the sheriff's budget. There's always room to tighten that belt. I look at the clerk and I look at what her concerns are. And so there's that piece. I also have expressed concern in terms of county councils about $40,000, because we know we are needing outside counsel. With every CBA, there's additional counsel time and costs. We don't even know what that's going to look like. That's a big chunk. So I have concerns about that. I have concerns about the clerk's budget. Again, with admin, I think we have, we've been toeing the line in terms of our budget, but we also have budgeted for an additional position. But I wonder where we can look at further cost savings within that admin budget, knowing, number one, that having someone who functions as a PIO or a communications person, I think, is becoming more and more critical when we see some of the narratives that are out there that are completely and utterly disinformation. So I think that it really is important for us to be funding that. I believe it's important for us to be funding a support for our administrator, because this job has gotten to the point where it is no longer what it used to be. It requires, I think it's basically almost 2 positions. So that's been a concern of mine. I just want to make sure that anything we do, public safety is important. It's a priority. But I don't want to reward, a a budget that maybe wasn't as, you know, as much fidelity to budgeting conservatively with another office that has been. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about how, from the standpoint of sort of being at the top of a department, really having a focus on, I'm going to do what I can to make sure. Was that song what I think it was?
My phone is on silent. Swear.
Saved by the Bell. I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, the attitude that, you know, we make decisions based on a prioritization of what I call frontline service staff, right? It's we don't directly manage in a group of individuals other than two. But, you know, the folks that do are doing the lion's share of the work. Therefore, when we look at budgets, our decisions are to prioritize those people first. We had our YCOM meeting on, was that yesterday? Tuesday. And I was smiling because Patty Sowers, you know, Patty, she's a wonderful individual and just an amazing asset for that team. And we were going through budgets and she said, you know, and we were talking about potential increases and she said, well, I wanted to throw out there that I have a second version. Here's my second version. And it's to, you know, make sure that I don't see any of the increase of the CBA or whatever, you know, the roll-ups were coming in the next budget year. And I don't need it. And I just want to take care of my staff. And it's that attitude that I recognize that we've said that many times before, but I really appreciate that attitude. And of course, we told her that there was no way we were going to agree to that because she's worth every penny. But I think that's a bit of the frustration. And we're seeing this happen in other counties. I mean, I don't know if you caught that Washington County described that they're feeling enormous budget pressures in our AOC meetings to the point where the commissioners have cut their travel budgets by significant amounts to where they can't stay overnight at an AOC conference, right? And that's pretty much the only conference we go to. We're down to one main conference. And they will be driving there and back because they can't, it's not in their budget to be able to stay at hotels and do things like that. So, you know, I guess it's a bit of frustration from that standpoint of, are we really tightening the belt in every department where we could be? You know, because we certainly are extremely lean. I don't know what else we could do at this point as commissioners. Our administrative team is too lean already, in my opinion. Ken needs support. Justin needs support. There's too much work. It's unreasonable to have those expectations. The PIO position is critical in my view. Whether that's rolled into this new FTE that we put in there or not, I don't know, but we're seeing these critical pieces, and a lot of these departments, like the clerk said, have unfunded mandates coming from the state that we are then going to have to pick up. And their only response to that is to make sure that they have funds in their budget that they can absorb the impact of it. If they don't, or there's a practice of sort of sweeping ending balances, I think on the whole, it makes the county less stable. It doesn't feel like a good budgeting practice going forward. And it certainly, I think to Ken's point, could create some problems, right, between elected officials and what they feel is their elected duty in terms of their fiscal responsibility to taxpayers. So I guess my question too, is a part of these two options. The first one adds back 2, the second one adds back 3. Does option 1, then if we look at adding back 2, does that still have in reality the same impact that we are facing now with, realigning the function of the jail, right? I mean, does 2 even get us there? Because based on our conversations, 2 wouldn't get us there. So from a operational standpoint, are we really looking at option 2 because we need 3 in order to not have operational impacts? Is that how you understand?
And to continually have that buffer, because like the sheriff has said before, it is a nonstop cycle and you have to have that buffer there to be hiring on because somebody's retiring or somebody's on leave or whatever it may be. So just that buffer alone, I think would take care of that without even addressing the extra 3 that would be short for the jail to expand it back out into the.
We also have the question about the medical contract, and that's a wild card.
Yeah.
And so to have a big surprise and there's no money to cover it when there is inevitably an increase, I don't think that's smart. We know it's coming, so that's a big piece too.
And we're making progress on the medical contract, and I think there will be some discussions that need to be had with the cost of that medical contract, and until we have something that's more definitive that we're ready to bring before the board. I can't measure the budgetary impact. Right now, we have a status quo that's been budgeted for what we've been paying for WellPath. And I'm also prepared that if the next provider, or if we have a proposal, it's like, we may have to go into a supplemental budget. I may have to look for additional funds. I'll just say from a liability standpoint, that one, that's where the contingency funds that we have, or the possibly contingency in the insurance liability is, that's where those funds would come into play possibly. Because again, we can't go without medical coverage in the jail.
Okay.
And then as far as what the positions do, as far as what's happening with the restitution center, again, that's an operational decision with the sheriff, and I'd probably look to the sheriff to answer those questions. I'm just trying to, how can we restore 3 positions for the next year? But then at the same time, recognizing that this budget is really tight, even for the next fiscal year. And there's probably, wherever we can find cost savings within that budget, the sheriff's going to have to find those cost savings in there. Because again, there's been a reliance on being able to use vacancy savings and beginning balance to close those gaps. And this will not close that gap. This just closes the gap to restore 3 positions. And the one part that I didn't address, but I know we've talked about it before, is version 30 of the budget does include several changes and cuts that came out of the discussions with the budget committee, where we restored some other deputy positions by cutting a sergeant position in the jail, this would restore the patrol deputy position that was cut, a civil position was cut. And so there were several cost savings measures that were applied in the version 30. So when you have those cost saving measures, plus we were able to restore a couple positions to get it up to 19 out of the jail fund, and there's 2 to get that to 21 positions. This would take to 23 positions in the jail and 30 patrol positions in patrol.
So a question about option 2.
Mhm.
So in all the ending balances in the sheriff's office that you have moved them to a personnel expense line, which means that is in every case. Am I seeing that?
I haven't actually moved it. That's what I'm proposing to do.
Oh, that's, yeah, right. So that's what you are proposing so that none of the ending, so either you zero them out in version 1.
And yeah, that's the other distinction too. I did not zero out those ending balances in option 2.
Right.
I
So,
left a little bit of funds in there to give a little bit of buffer for building next year's budget, because recognizing this is I'm cold patching the road. I'm not repaving it. So I'm trying to take care of some potholes, sorry, all the dumb analogies. But
okay.
so I did leave a little bit of funds. I do have some concerns about taking too many funds, that those cost savings that emergency management has, because it's my understanding in conversations with the sheriff, there's some question mark about what's going on with the state and any of the state funding that's coming into local emergency management. So that's where one of the biggest swings you'll see between the two options is I'm only taking 20,000 from there and still leaving 52,000 of an ending balance for emergency management. So if there's any uncertainty from the state or any changes, that we can continue to, at least have some funds there to start budgeting in emergency management. Same with court security. Or I could zero them and move it all into expense lines and,
So in zeroing everything, all of the ending fund balances and putting them all in personnel expense lines,
mhm.
we're in the critical position where we're not trying to deal with something that's chronic. We want to deal with the acute portion of this. And so that I'm just thinking if there is a option for option 2B, and that would be to, if we to zero the ending fund balances to really get us to where we want to do, which is to restore all of the positions that we want to restore. And
That's $112,000 remaining in ending balances,
Between patrol, jail, court security.
and emergency
And
management.
emergency management.
That's 112,000. That would partially fund a position. And again, the numbers I'm looking at, or the totals I'm looking at, is salary plus roll-ups. So that wouldn't be sufficient to fully fund a full-time FTE deputy. We'd have to, but again, if the board would like to pursue that scenario, we can do that. Taking that plus the 71,000 that I had earmarked for jail medical, now that would fund a full position.
So I'm looking at option 2. So this restores 3 positions for the sheriff's department. And factors in potential CBA impacts.
It does provide some additional funds depending on what that final outcome is. I do know that the salaries budgeted in the sheriff's office did have a percentage increase to help offset what's currently on the table, but there's still some unknown with that.
Can we discuss that?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is there 2 years worth, because that's what we would have to absorb immediately.
If it's something
The
that relates to
currently-
bargaining, we can go into executive session to talk about it.
I mean, what's current,
Need
I
to.
mean, we can talk, because last offers are on the table. And so what we have in here that was budgeted in here was the last offer, percentage that incorporates that last offer plus what we had in our COLA proposal are included in the salary numbers.
In this.
Correct.
And version 30 did include, in other words, some of those.
It did.
Okay,
It did. In fact, that was one of this one was one of the few that actually had those numbers factored in.
question, Christian, about your budget. I know you said that you were comfortable with, you weren't overjoyed, but you were not kind of pushing back on the 40,000, looking ahead to what your outside counsel bills could
Yeah.
be. Do you feel that you have sufficient to cover worst case scenario?
Well, I mean, my understanding of that amount is it's not
None of
been
it's budgeted.
appropriated, so that isn't a pot of money that I could spend over the next fiscal year anyway.
Correct.
What has happened in this year and in years past is we've tried to watch that outside counsel expense very closely and do as much as we can in-house and be judicious in when and how we engage outside counsel. I'd like to hope that what we've got budgeted for next year will be sufficient. You know, we are still going into next year with several open contracts. So I expect that some of those outside counsel expenses are likely to continue at least for maybe the first quarter. I'd like to hope that by maybe the first half of the year, a lot of that work will have tapered off. But what's also happened in the past is depending on the needs and depending on the funds in the budget, I've worked with Ken and we've been able to access other funds to help cover those costs. And you know, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers from prior years to see, you know, exactly how much we exceeded in some years and what exactly we may have come in under in other years. But I mean, all I have to go off of is what's happened in the past, and those numbers have proven sufficient in conjunction with the other resources that we've been able to work with through admin. So, and I know that ending balance in proportion to the overall budget number might be a little bit higher too. So, I mean, it's up to the board to decide where to spend the money, but I don't feel particularly concerned that that's anything that's going to hamstring the work that we have to do. And obviously we would have ongoing discussions with the board and Ken, depending on what might arise.
So when I see total change to expense is $3.2 million.
Correct. You want-
That is.
Yeah.
Not,
That's not just the sheriff's office. That's
Right.
this entire list.
but it's not all personnel either.
No,
It's
and I'm
transit.
happy because I know we jumped right into the sheriff's office. I can run through these lines here really quickly and give you a high level view. I tried to attach the memorandums as available. You want me to just go ahead and run through the list really quick?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of what's, personnel related and then what's sort of these other.
So it's
Changes.
a mix. So the top one, the Fund 233, we already had this. This isn't really an increase in expense because the 173, or it's a smaller increase in expense, but the $173,212 is what we've received to date in opioid settlement dollars. We've been booking that in insurance reserve. But I know that there's discussions to be had on how those funds are going to be used. There's limitations on it. So I'm putting that into a new fund 233, which is going to be a special revenue fund. Because again, a lot of these payments are going to be paid out over the next 15 years, and then we can, help facilitate discussions on where these funds are going to be used. So right now I have the year to date is 173. I put in a placeholder of 100,000, just because it keeps changing and we keep seeing various checks that come in. So it's really hard to track on how many settlements we're gonna see. And we're gonna put that in the general line and then the actual, that's gonna be discussions to be had over the next several months with the board on how we're gonna and where we're gonna use those funds. So that's a new fund. But it's, yeah, it's a change because again, it's the expenditure was already appropriated in Fund 80 and it'd be more appropriate in a special revenue fund. The next one is transit. Cynthia had quite a few changes, but this is all related to grants and updated stiff formulas, and then having the funds appropriated in capital lines with those updated formulas to make sure that we have funds to purchase vehicles. We just want to have it appropriated. Unclear with the supply shortage on how realistic we're going to be able to get all those, but if something were to change, we want to make sure Cynthia has the funds. There's also a reclassification request. That one is a personnel driver, and that's for one of Cynthia's program coordinators moving to a management analyst, but that's actually a pretty small overall budgetary impact. And the positions already exist in the budget, so they've been fully in transit. So it's more about moving a person, less about adding actual personnel expense to that budget. So
quick question on that. So was that like a last minute catch mistake or?
it was something that all the positions were built into the budget. Cynthia missed
Okay.
that this should have come forward as part of the budget committee and realized that we didn't check that box.
Okay.
And so that's to correct
So
that.
it's not customary for department heads to come forward now at this juncture and,
Correct.
okay. Thank you.
Question.
Yes.
And knowing that the opioid settlement funds are a complete moving target, and every time we turn around, there's another iteration of what's coming and when it's coming and all of that. Knowing that they are restricted and they're supposed to be for prevention and treatment,
Mhm.
could we not look at one of the ways you prevent people from doing drugs is through enforcement?
Yeah, see, that's the tricky part, because without, Christian diving into the settlement agreements and we've had that question on the restrictions and the use of those funds, and I can't give you a definitive answer. Can we use it for law enforcement, or does it all have to go to HHS for treatment? There's still questions around that on the intent of these funds, and we're still receiving guidance clear to this day. And then we also have legal fees that we have to also pay as part of this as well. So that's why, because I can't answer that question, that's one of the reasons why we put it in the special revenue fund and not directly in the sheriff's budget or not directly into Fund 16, the HHS budget. We're putting it into a special revenue fund, so those discussions can be had, and then you can do transfers or record expenses to that, much like we do for O&C, landfill license reserve, some of these other categories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so when can we start using them?
After July 1, and this fund is set up and we have an adopted budget.
Okay, so when would we have some information on the parameters of what we can do with that money?
We can work on that. I could see this much in the same lines as like we did for ARPA and some of those other things. When we have a new funding source, we need to do some research. We can schedule a work session, have a discussion, get some time for Christian to do the legal analysis that he needs to do. I can also reach out. Lindsay can reach out, the sheriff can, again, like we've done in the past, what are all the various opinions on what we can use these funds for? Because I'm also still trying to pencil out the legal fees, what funds are still coming in. There's a lot of uncertainty about how much funds are actually going to be available in here.
So knowing that, I mean, there are so many unanswered questions. I'm just wondering if we could sort of keep one eye on this as a funding source for ongoing for what's going on in the sheriff's office, making that a priority, enforcement, and sort of the halo effect. We know in Yamhill County, you don't want to do this because they will bring the hammer down, that kind of a thing. So
Potentially for
Poten-
15 years.
potentially.
So again, it has a limited window too.
Okay, but we do have a donkey in a ditch, and we'll take what we can take right now, even if it's just a tiny, even a tiny fraction of this, a significant amount of money. And then we don't have to be rating all these other departments to the degree that we're rating them.
It's something that we could discuss, but again, I haven't factored in the legal fees. I'm fully appropriating this. And I can't say, yes, we could use it instead of pulling discretionary funds. I would be hesitant to
I'm
do
fairly
that.
certain the answer will be no, that it isn't something we can use for enforcement. It needs to be, as you said, for remediation and treatment.
Nothing's more of a impetus to getting clean than going to jail.
Because maybe it might help offset costs of, other program areas in the jail, that there might be
Mhm.
treatment or prevention services or a portion of the medical contract or some of those examples that
Yeah.
it could fall into. And now I'm just,
Do you know that it can be for anything right now?
it's basically can be used for treatment and preventative.
And that's really, we haven't gotten much more of a explanation. I think folks are just now starting to delve more deeply into, okay, exactly how the money can be spent.
Correct. And
So
I
for example, you could
we haven't even
spend, you
paid
can
legal
clearly
fees
spend it
yet.
on paying for contractors who are out in the field providing these direct opioid treatment and related services.
It could be as strict as the only place that we could spend it would be over in,
You can use
for
it to buy
counselors in HHS or
can.
or
you
buying
can-
Narcan or
Yeah.
If somebody had a question of could it be used for well path, how long would it be to find out whether that?
I think the answer to that would be how much of WellPath's services are related to the treatment of opioid services, and potentially to that extent, you might be able to use it for that.
Right. So we'll work on that. At this point, this is to help one, bring clarity on where we have a special revenue fund set up to help facilitate those conversations. Because again, I don't think the easy fix would have been is to record it to Fund 216, which is HHS's budget, and it would be part of that. But based on discussions with the board, I figured it's more appropriate to put it into a special revenue fund, and we can continue to have discussions on how those funds are spent moving forward. So.
Has there been any more discussion about HHS taking over the well path contract, or was there?
Different scope. Yeah.
Kind of, the end result was given.
Yeah. Let me see. So then, okay, the next one, where did I leave off? Oh, transit. The next one, a request came from Brad adding a FTE for a senior office specialist in the support enforcement office. And he provided a memo that I included in the packet to help fund that. You can see that they had a pretty large ending balance. Keeping in mind, this isn't a general fund ending balance. That's why you didn't see them come up on my list, because they have a third of their funding is general fund. The other 2/3 is federal funds. Brad, always comes in and talks about that. So that's an adjustment there. HHS, which I think the board has seen this every year. They see a lot of changes with all the various agreements. It's really hard. We have several snapshots and changes. And so you're going to see that there's about $1.1 million in changes to their budget. And there's 8 pages of where all those changes are being applied on the supporting documentation in the packet. Again, there's so many moving pieces with the changes in HHS. that you're gonna see, the way the program codes, how grants are applied, how they split it up. Some of these things are $3 changes. Some of them are substantial changes. Some of them are changes with FTEs. So that's all available. And if you have questions about that. We already talked about the sheriff. When you get into 3010020, which is planning, Ken Friday had a request because it looks like they need to move $40,000 out of their ending balance into a transfer line to help facilitate buying a new truck for an electrical inspector. And then the changes you see again is what I've have proposed to help offset the restoring the 3 positions in the sheriff's office. And then the final one, this was late breaking based on the meeting that I had on Tuesday. The YCOM board of directors approved an increase to dues. So I needed to add $26,000 of discretionary funds to central dispatch. This is what the county pays for our share of the YCOM dues. So to ensure we could pay that. And so that's all of the changes that are being proposed. As I said, there's none of the requests here, none of the requested increases exceed, they're all well below the 10%. So it's allowed to be approved by the board without having to go back to the budget committee. And basically what I would be looking for today is if you're comfortable or if you have modifications, if there was a motion to approve accepting, the changes on this deliberation list, then I'll take this list and build it into version 40. Then we'd be doing all of our work to get the budget ready for final adoption on the 29th.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, there was there is an additional $560,000 for the 3 add backs for those to restore those 3 positions in the sheriff's office in option 2.
Plus the well path. Because originally it was 400 and
Yeah, this is $560,000 of adjustments that we're making between all the ending balance adjustments to restore 3 positions and have $71,000 for to add to the medical line in the jail.
And those would be restricted to those lines.
You could, correct. I think the sheriff's here, we hear the intent and the discussion and everything that we have in the packet. That's the intention for these funds.
Okay, so $489,000 for personnel to restore those 3 positions and $71,000 for the medical.
I do want to take into account the clerk's concerns. I don't want to ignore the.
Yeah, I am not comfortable doing that. And I know I appreciate Christian, your comments. I'm not comfortable taking funds from the clerk or the county council. That's one part. The second part, I guess, is if we figure out another way to come up with that $50,000 between the 2 departments. And we agree to option 2, does that mean operationally that you are not going to have to remove the, what's it called? Restitution. I was thinking restoration, restitution center. I mean, essentially that's what that means. Okay.
But there's $50,000 we would have to find somewhere else.
Mhm.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the other thing would be is if we either pull the funds from 1002, the 50,000, or we just don't include that in there. We take from all the other proposed areas and then we reduce the amount going into the jail medical by 50,000. If that makes sense.
But that still leaves us in a position of having to perhaps at some point find that money.
We're gonna have to anyways.
And then maybe by then we'll know whether or not we can use that opioid money.
Possibly. Just, the one thing I would just keep in mind is the funds. That 50,000, we're not really reducing the clerk's budget or county council's budget or these budgets. We're taking from savings that they incurred in previous fiscal years that when they built their budgets out, there was a remaining balance that they didn't budget. And so that's where these funds are coming from and why I think we can reduce the discretionary to each one. So.
I'm just concerned that, it's sort of like with, when we zero out budgets, that encourages people to spend all their money. We see how that happens in government. That's not what we do, but then it's kind of like what we're doing now is we're saying, spend it while you can, because it might get raided.
Yeah, I've always shared that I'm not a fan of zero balance budgeting because of the, that you having worked at the federal level, you get the spending spree in the last couple months of the fiscal year because of the concerns that if you realize any cost savings, you're going to see a reduction. And to date, with the way we do budgets, we don't penalize departments for having savings. But that being said, that's why I was really looking at, I'm not going to pick on Christian, but he already said it, but he has a pretty good ending balance that comes in. The clerk has a pretty healthy ending balance that's been projected. Admin, we still have the position that the board wanted me to add. I still have that position authority built in, and we still had a little bit of an ending balance there. So I do think that those funds can handle some of the reductions that are being proposed here, because again, it's going to impact building budget next year. But like I said, I think this should be a one-time reduction to get the donkey out of the ditch. And then we're going to be picking up this discussion. This is going to be an ongoing discussion, because I still think the sheriff's still going to have to be very diligent and look for areas to where we can realize cost savings within that budget, because it's not going to get better next year. So.
Well, if county council is offering.
County council did not offer. This was a budget officer. I'm gonna take the pressure off of Christian
Thank you,
because
Ken. Yeah.
This was the budget officer going through and looking at where I think I could come up with the funds.
Well, I'm acknowledging that you aren't putting up much resistance. And
Resistance is futile.
It's not my money. So,
um,
it's in the budget, but yeah, if the board decides they need it elsewhere, that's okay.
yeah. But Carrie, Hinton definitely took time to say, I'm not okay with this. So I want to acknowledge that she clearly has concerns over things that we probably don't even know about, right? She hasn't been able to express all of that, but I just think, if it's that much of a concern for her and her department, then we find that money elsewhere. Remove it from administration ending balance, or, it's a $10,000 expense. Or discretionary.
Well,
just-
if there's concern with that, the other option would be to further reduce maybe court security's ending balance by 10,000. And then not take it from the clerk.
But we already discussed lowering the well path until we can figure out in the interim where the.
Or yeah, or we could just
Right.
remove it.
So we just go down 60,000 for well path instead of the 70, remove it from the clerk. And then hopefully we can figure out something with the opioid settlement.
Are you saying reduce this jail medical to 61?
10,000.
Yeah, well, just, it would, that 10,000 wouldn't be there.
And that's a contingency, right? Based on an unexpected impact.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think with that stipulation, I would be in support of option 2. I think that this is gonna be, dog control. Is the assumption that we are
Well,
fine this year?
with version 30 and with the discussions that we had at budget committee, we did make several changes to basically fully appropriate the contracts and make sure that there's sufficient funds for contracts, kenneling, all that is built into that budget.
For the 3 kennels.
For 3.
For 3, correct?
Was it?
Okay. Yeah, so that's where we would need to have some discussion because I think that we're hearing not only from your deputies, but from the public that you know, the situation with, you know, dog bites and big dogs at large and livestock kills and all of that, that to go from 3 isn't covering it, to go to 1, I would think that's a non-starter. So that we fund Homeward Bound at 4, look to Newburgh, and then we really need to have a discussion about either bringing it back in-house or looking at a plan C, because I don't think it's not even feasible to say that county our size is going to have a contract for 1, and yet we have to figure out how we're going to fund it. So, you know, I don't even think it's up for discussion as far as is that contract going down to more.
So what we have budgeted in version 30 is $85,000 for professional services and then $90,000 for dog kennel rentals.
And
which would be
that's for
3.
the Original 3.
They're 28 grand a pop.
Sheriff. I know the numbers. Sheriff's gonna know the details and, you know,
No, yeah, no, he's right. Those numbers are what we put in the budget. What we were looking at doing, because we know at the end of next fiscal year, that will basically deplete everything.
Yeah.
We were looking at the conversation of doing 1 kennel with Homeward Bound, 1 with Newburgh Friends, which would be a total roughly 60,000, and saving the other 30,000 for overflow and for future contracts, because we don't have anything moving forward after that. So if we spent all 90,000 with Homeward Bound this year, then we would be depleting a lot of the trust fund, and at the end of next year, you wouldn't be able to operate.
and this one leaves 13,000 of those trust funds remaining.
Yep.
We do have 53,000 of an ending balance, but
Yeah, that's an
again,
unknown, yeah.
But so how much does 1 kennel cost
It's 30,000 per kennel a year.
a year? Okay.
So it's 90,000 for 3. Plus we have a little bit of overflow. So if we end up having the ability to have more dogs there, which we haven't had that opportunity recently, but if we were to have an additional one, then they charge us per day for the 3 days or 4 days they're there.
And Newburgh, have they expressed yes or no?
They are comfortable with doing 1 kennel with the ability of having overflow.
1.
Yeah.
So is that factored into okay, so you're suggesting take it from Homeward Bound from 3 down to 1, and then one at Newburgh. So that's still, we're still one short of what we're used to doing, and we already are way under over capacity there with the 3.
Correct.
And they have dogs of ours that have been there
Months.
forever.
Correct.
And since they're a no-kill shelter, they're looking to us to say, what do you want us to do with animals that are not adoptable? So we have some difficult discussions to have. But I think, I mean, we're going to be short covering this going forward. We knew that money wasn't going to last forever. And so it's kind of been like, I would just say that, and their contract is up June 30.
Correct.
And they're looking for some direction as to what do they do going forward. And I think one kennel, I just don't think we can.
When you say that that's
Homeward
Newbury?
Bound.
Oh, Homeward Bound, okay. So my understanding from the budget committee was that we knew it was depleting all of it for this year, just to get us through this year, knowing we had to figure out what we're doing for next year. And if there's a 54,000 ending balance with 3 kennels, we can add the 4th to Newbury and still have that for this year, but knowing that we need to do something for next year. So,
I mean, that's another action we can quickly on the fly, if we need to fully appropriate every penny that we have in dog control budget, we could do that, but
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
If you want me to spend the money down to 0, which is
Yeah.
a conversation that we've been having, or you guys have been having for
Right.
a while, that you don't necessarily want to. Our thought was that if we reduce the kennels, we don't have enough kennels no matter what.
Right.
So the question is, do we stretch that money out as far as we can go? Or do we spend every penny knowing that July 1 of 2024, we don't have any money to run dog control?
so, and I'm looking at a bigger picture. There's a problem no matter what we do.
Right.
So let's fully, to me, and I think the budget committee's understanding was deplete it all. Get for sure the 3 with homeward bound pets. I'm proposing doing the 1 more for the Newburgh, knowing that next year we have to find funding for it.
You're hearing, I'm sure you're hearing from your deputies, they're coming up on aggressive dogs, they're being bitten. People are calling you saying, what do I do? There's an aggressive dog in my yard, and you're going, and unfortunately your office has to say, can't help you, figure it out. Well, I don't think we can be there. So.
Yeah, and the hard part is, again, if you look at the dog control budget, what's built in here is an estimate of the only revenue that comes in here is the dog licensing fees, which is the largest revenue, which is budgeted to be 115,000 for this upcoming year. And so you have $115,000 in license fees, and then 40,000 of that goes to city contracts for their share or their portion of their enforcement. And then that's what you have left for administering the program and kenneling. For the expenses, it's the difference between that too. So you only have 80,000. So we've had to supplement over the years with those trust funds in order to balance. Otherwise, so you have both. Here you have more, it's a revenue issue. There's insufficient funds coming in here to support the program.
What, the revenue for the dog tags, what is that per animal? Does anybody know the math on that?
Yeah,
Can you give us a rough
yeah,
estimate?
Just rough.
it's around 20-ish, 25. I mean, it depends on if you do 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
Senior,
Right.
Senior that's been grandfathered in from 20 years ago, where they pay like $2 for their license and they still complain. It's, the issue really comes down to licensing in itself will not fund the program.
Not at 20.
Well, but we're at the mid-high range if you compare across the state
Okay.
for licensing fees. So, because we do this every 3 or 4 years, we'll look and see. We've adjusted ours up probably about 5 or 6 years ago because of that. But when I was looking at the budget probably 5 years ago, we went through a scenario and took our existing number of dogs that we have licensed in the county. And if every single one of those dogs was licensed, we would need an additional 13,000 dogs licensed just to break even. So I don't know if there's 13,000 dogs in Yamhill County that are unlicensed. And if they are, we have no way of finding them because we don't have anybody to go out and look for them. So.
But we're spending 40 grand on trying to enforce
Oh, no,
no tags.
no, we're not spending anything.
What
on
was the
enforcement.
40 grand that you just said?
But that,
That comes
the
back out.
40,000 goes out to the cities.
Yeah, no, so there's a process that we've come up with where when we got away from doing any dog control enforcement whatsoever, we went to the cities and said, we'll continue to maintain your licensing process because we have the infrastructure, but we need to retain 25% of that revenue, and we'll give you 75% of that licensing fee to go back to your own city to pay for your own enforcement because we're no longer doing enforcement in your city.
Because paying for enforcement and their own kenneling, because keeping in mind the 3 is for the sheriff's office that we've been
Yeah,
talking
city.
about, not for cities.
So the
So
city of
McMinnville-
McMinnville has their own contract with Homeward Bound, and they use the licensing revenue portion that they get to pay for that contract.
Hmm.
So the city's doing the same thing we're doing. They don't respond to anything other than aggressive dogs, dog bites. They don't do dogs at large. They don't do any of the nuisance, the barking dogs and that kind of stuff. None of that stuff is done anymore. And we will pick up a dog if we have the ability to and take them to the kennel. So that, the budget you look at right now has zero enforcement at all. There's no license checking, there's no license enforcement. Our staff, if they happen to be out and they are on a call and they happen to notice that the dogs aren't licensed, they can issue the citation, but those are not, it's not something that they're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think we have to be at 4. I mean, the consequence, we already know what the consequence is. We've got people out in rural Yamhill County who are just accepting these dogs and feeding them and sheltering them because we can't take them. I mean, that's not really fair either. So I think we have to get to 4.
Yeah, when we were talking about it budget season, we're talking 20 is the
Right,
need.
right.
So, yeah, and maybe start regulating the importing of dogs from California.
Exactly. Exactly. There needs to be another discussion about another way we can house and care for larger numbers of animals, seeing what's happening. I mean, we're seeing it, with kids and everyone else. Everyone's just dumping them and then figure it out. So that becomes government's problem, except it's not fair to the animals. So I think we need to be looking at what's another model that we can house dogs. I know that everybody has their own ideas of how we can do that, and I think that's needs to be a discussion the board has.
Okay, so to get us to 4 kennels, whether it's 3 in 1 or 4 in Homeward Bound or whatever, what's our impact for 23, 24?
I think based on what the sheriff was saying, I think we would have to remove the remaining 67,209 that is currently budgeted in both a restricted balance and an ending fund balance into
Make it available.
make it available. So we would move it into, I didn't mean to close that.
I need.
So that would move 67,209 from the balances in the dog control budget, and we would put that into the dog kennel rentals. And so then that would provide 165,000.
In the kennel.
At the kennel, in the kennel line.
And that, is there additional needed then? There wouldn't be,
No.
because that's what.
No, that
No,
wouldn't.
this would just spend everything to zero. Yeah.
Right.
This will make everything available. And then, I mean, we can do this. And again, I think this is another one, because again, you know, my focus here is trying to get to the finish line and adopt the budget at this point and make sure that all departments have sufficient appropriations in order to, one, have the lights and doors unlocked on July 1. But then the second part is, if in like this case, if the board wants to schedule a work session into the new fiscal year and possibly consider reopening, because that was a pretty extensive process that we went through last time when we went with the current dog control ordinance and the licensing and that setup. I mean, that was multiple meetings and hearings that went into that. And if the board wants to reopen that and start having those discussions, we could start getting some work sessions on the calendar in the coming months to talk, you know, to see if we can find a solution.
Maybe we need to start collaborating with the city of McMinnville too, to help Homeward Bound Pets with their expansion or whatever the hurdles are there.
I hear commercial property might be pretty cheap soon.
There's a wing of the jail not being used. No.
We talked about that, didn't we?
No, that's actually a good idea. The
That part of
pet-
the jail's now gonna be reopened, so
Well, not-
unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to house dogs in the
Let me expand on that.
facility.
They're therapeutic.
That'd be a good idea. Yes,
Well, I can tell you.
there's programs out there,
that-
and I'm thinking actually share it.
Yeah,
That's another
well,
conversation.
We have a long history
That's what
of,
we used to do with our
right.
work crews, and we had
Yeah.
individuals working out there.
Right.
It's just, the program as it is right now is too cost prohibitive. You have to, which is part of the work session conversation, we have to come up with a solution that is completely different than the way it's set up right now. Because as it's set up right now, anytime you add any type of bodies or personnel, they're going to be falling under our personnel expenses. And that just shoots the budget through.
Mhm.
So it's gonna be a total conversation of reconfiguring the program as we see it.
My thought was Sheridan. And I know it's federal versus us being piddly down here in Yamhill County, but there might be some options there to have, there's programs for dogs to be in prisons to help inmates.
Usually they're puppies and they're therapy dogs that they train up and then
And this
Place.
program will be adult dogs and they're gonna train them to be good dogs.
Be
Adult
more than
dogs
happy to
that
have
wanna
that
bite your face
conversation
off.
with the warden and see what their thoughts are on,
You got a connection out there?
yeah, the warden.
Cool.
talk to the warden.
Yeah, we'll talk to the warden.
Okay. So there's consensus on dog control.
yeah, but I think
Now, when you're moving the 67, it's not gonna take all 67 because we're just discussing adding one more kennel for a total of 4.
I was gonna fully appropriate the full 67 to ensure that if
We could do,
that you have the flexibility to pay for the additional kennel or a possible pivot or a change, that if out of the work sessions, we're going a different direction, it's fully appropriated and available to spend.
and what are the issues if it's more than 10%?
Budget,
Or is that
We'd have to call
overall?
the,
supplemental budget.
We're still under the 10% overall.
Yeah, because it's for the fund, and this fund is in 200, which also includes HHS.
Ah,
And so that's, we're still within the 10%.
So HHS program.
speak
Makes
freely.
Makes sense. It's public health.
Whether it's in
Okay.
HHS, the sheriff's office, the county counsel's office.
Say it.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Admin.
Now,
Sorry.
now,
You know, regardless of where that's going to be, in order to facilitate that program, it's gonna require revenues. It's gonna require general fund revenues. If it was an HHS can't use Medicaid funds for a dog control program. They, you know, they can't, so whatever comes in.
We have a labeling issue. We need to call it something different.
Public health. Rabies.
Jody likes dogs.
That's why I think county council's office.
Yeah,
Mhm.
county council.
Yeah.
I'll need that money back then.
No, so we can, that was the intent, is we'll move all those funds into an appropriated line. And again, if the board is with that revision to the option two, I need a with also the change of taking out the $10,000 for coming from the clerk's budget, and will further reduce court security budget by 10,000. I can make those changes to version 40. Yeah, but I'll need a motion and approval
One more thing.
to make those changes to the approved. Yes.
The SIP program, the special fund that we agreed to, is that its own fund or is that part of the general fund?
No, that we haven't really talked about where that community service fee would be applied, but because it is a general community service fee in lieu of receiving taxes, I would assume that we would just book that in lieu of taxes to 1002 and minus the direct fees.
Community service fee,
I
and
meant
then there's
the
that separate fee, that
separate
additional
fee,
fee,
the
the board agreed
72,000 a
to.
year.
that additional $72,000 a year
Or
that the board asked Hampton to pay to help fund. I think the intent was to help fund local needs in West Valley, or, needs that are identified on an annual basis by the board.
I just assume that all those funds would be coming through 1002.
I'm not sure where they'd be coming through, but
Which is where all of our taxes would come.
yeah, I mean, remember, community service fee is not a tax, it's just a fee.
Yeah, but it's in lieu of taxes, and sometimes
I mean, Tarek went to great pains to remind us that it wasn't a tax. They will be invoicing it, and then Hampton will be paid.
I am
Just pay it.
approaching this from a budgetary
Yeah.
standpoint,
Yeah.
not a taxation
You made
standpoint.
him get closer to the back.
I certainly did.
Well, so
I can get
let's
closer to mine
assume,
as well.
Let's take it down.
let's assume that the community service fee goes into 1002.
Mhm.
Can we then distribute funds to I don't know, West Valley Fire or whatever from 1002?
I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, I'm
'Cause-
not sure where it goes. I mean, we're in the process of working on that IGA, and we'll determine what the percentage distributions are from that fee, how that fee gets received and processed, and where it sits, and I'll let Ken deal with that.
I would like to see at least the separate fee in a separate fund. So it's not just lumped together into 1002. Because we were going to then determine, how do we just pool it for a while?
Right.
Do
Well, and you
we,
have other issues there with soil and water conservation district.
that's community service fee. I'm talking about the 72,000.
I think that is kind of the way you discussed it. You could try and address the shortfall that ESD and
From the 72.
no, from the community service fee by slightly changing the distribution percentages.
Yeah, but we're talking about two different things.
Two different.
Community
pots in
service
there.
fee is the fee 365,000 or whatever it was that we were going to divvy up as a percentage to affected taxing districts. Then there's the $72,000 additional fee that we didn't know how we were going to spend it, but
Correct.
we wanted it, the intention is for it to go to Willamina or wherever.
Right.
So I feel like that needs to be a separate fund almost,
Yeah.
because if we want to do grants to it, or if we want to, I don't want it to get lost.
Yeah, I would not, in that case, put that into a special revenue fund. I wouldn't create a special revenue fund for that amount. I'll have to think about that one.
Maybe it goes into the economic development director's department fund.
I would I would avoid mixing that with economic development funds.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's a special revenue. Because again, much in the same way, I think we still could book the actual revenue in 1002. Because it is discretionary in nature. And the funds going out, whether it's going to the ropes team or those expenses, we would basically pay for at a 1039, which is non-departmental, much in the same way we do for the water master, for your community mediators, for who am I, CASA, some of those other programs that we have funds that are discretionary in nature and we write checks to, and you approve those funds. And I don't believe, I don't think based on the amounts that we're talking about with these funds, I don't think we have to necessarily build them into a special revenue fund because there's other options available for transferring appropriation authority during the fiscal year to ensure that we can spend those funds or have them fully appropriated or add the expense during the year. So
Okay.
the more I'm thinking about it, I still think we would book the revenue into 1002 and it would be booked to a specific line to where you could track it and then the expenses would go out through 1039.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying my best to think on the fly on.
Well,
That's all right. And while
Put it
you're
on your
thinking,
record.
because I'm almost certain that part of that 72 was to make soil and water district whole.
No.
So if that's gonna be a problem, being able to get that back out, better think about that one too.
I don't think it will be.
Okay.
But that was not in that pot of money.
I would have to
No.
go back and listen as well, but I want to say that the conversation we had was to possibly adjust the distributions from the community service fee to make up the shortfall. Do it that way. So,
Well, the reason we don't know, because we don't have the agreements in place yet, because
No,
we've still got the
I'm
90
just saying,
days going to. figure
that's
that
how
out.
I recalled that conversation happening, is that's how, if there was a shortfall to cover that
Right.
shortfall for the soil and water and
Yeah.
USD, you might readjust the percentage distribution out of the community service fee.
Okay.
I think, well, this is another conversation. I think the established percentages are probably enough to cover the shortfall and then some, because there's enough of a community service fee, but we'll see. But I just want to make sure that we can have flexibility with that and we can literally cut them a check.
Because it's not unusual. We try to build as much appropriation authority into the budget that if we do, that's a lot of times you may recall, I highlight placeholders and
Yeah.
where. And that's really to maintain appropriation authority, that if we end up getting a grant that wasn't anticipated, or if that we have the appropriation authority built in, that we can receive those funds and spend those funds as they're intended. So.
And when would we have those discussions during budget? In other words, in terms of the board making decisions about where that money goes. So for instance, if there was a discussion about a West Valley project or dog control, that would be during budgets.
It could be,
Could be.
or it could be a work session. I
Oh,
think we're
okay.
still pending because we haven't entered into the agreements on the
Yeah.
community service fee on what that distribution is going to look like. And then, of course, that would be my point where I'm advocating that, like, whatever we get from the community service fee going then to bolster the general fund would, because I think it's needed. So. But I'll save that for. Okay.
Okay, so you need a motion to proceed with these changes?
Yeah, to approve, I know there was consensus, to approve the changes provided in option 2, subject to the additional edits that the board asked for. Sorry, I know that's very generic, but
Okay, well, I'll move to approve option 2
Mhm.
with the following changes. restore the ending fund balance for the county clerk to 201,480. Reduce the courthouse security ending fund balance by 10,000. An additional 10,000, sorry. Appropriate all of the ending balance and reserve balance in dog control. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think that was all.
Correct. I think that.
I thought we were reducing the well path by 10,000.
No, we just,
I don't remember doing the court security because of the
oh, maybe I
opioid settlement
got that wrong.
money.
I'm just concerned that if we reduce the jail medical contingency, we're gonna have to figure it out later, because more than likely, it's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, I think the court security,
I'm fine with that. I'm
Yes.
just, the conversation was for the
Okay,
well path, because the conversation was we're gonna ask about the settlement monies, if it
Sure.
could go towards that. Basically, we're buying time, knowing that it would have to go back to the well path again. But I'm okay with the security. It's fine.
Yeah. so I think I named all the changes.
yes.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, thank you.
Okay, so for the next step in the process, so I'm gonna be taking this list, we're gonna input all the changes into the budget, roll it over into version 40. All these changes will be reflected in version 40. We'll be working on the appropriation, schedule of appropriation, resolution, everything to get this ready for final adoption on the 29th. So, thank you.
With the 1 day to spare.
Thanks, Ken, for all the work. on
Yes,
this. It's
thank
been
you.
Extra added burden, so thank you. for
Thank
that.
you, Sheriff, for coming.
Thank you, Sheriff.
See ya.
Okay. I believe that concludes our public hearing, if there's nothing else on the budget. And that brings us to announcements. So speaking of budgets, we had our AOC meetings, several, and couple things of note, the DDA bill, House Bill 2054 has passed the House floor yesterday. I think it was like 55-1, so it was, and then some other stragglers. So that's moving to the Senate. I just got an alert that the Senate is now back in the Capitol. So we'll see what that does going forward. And then we are having conversations about AOC dues structure. That is going to continue to be a discussion. Not all counties responded to that survey, so hopefully more do, and we can have a more robust, comprehensive discussion about how our dues will be structured going forward. I mentioned the YCOM Budget Committee from Tuesday. We just approved a slight increase to the dues. That's mainly personnel. And I talked about how much we appreciate Patty Sowers and all that she does. She also mentioned that there is an increased pressure of behavioral health calls to YCOM. So it's great, as Kim Morris mentioned, it's great that so many people are engaging in McMinnville to try and find solutions to some of these recurring problems that we're experiencing on 3rd Street and with individuals having mental health breakdowns and causing issues. The consequence of that has been that we've educated people, and she has educated people to the point where they now know what to do, and they're calling 988 or they're calling the non-emergent line, and it's starting to put somewhat of a increased burden on YCOM. So while they always prioritize calls, It's just the volume and how do you manage behavioral health calls? And so I asked her to type up a memo to educate us in terms of what that impact is looking like. She's working on that. And then I'm going to take that to the McMinnville group as well, so that they're aware of just what it means, you know, down the chain when we start to use those processes more. McMinnville Safety Task Force meeting was Tuesday after the YCOM meeting, and I was able to make the second half of the meeting. They are talking about cleaning up graffiti in McMinnville and possibly gating the alley behind Third Street Pizza. As you know, Third Street Pizza burned down because of a fire set by a transient individual. And so they're talking with the fire department and Recology and the city police department about possibly gating the alley. They're also working with Recology to reduce the number of dumpster fires, because that seems to be a more common occurrence of late. And so, you know, some of the businesses are grouping together to see if they can't come up with solutions with Recology to maybe where they have like 2 or 3 dumpsters rather than 50 different garbage cans, you know, to have to deal with. And it's becoming increasingly dangerous for Recology's folks to go back there and pick up garbage at 3 a.m. So anyway, very impressed with that group. Kim Morris has done a great job of organizing individuals in McMinnville. I think the Facebook page is up to over 1,500 people on it. So a lot of folks engaging and really putting some pressure on the city council to be responsive. So that's good. Any other announcements? I have a few, but I'll save them for the end.
Just quickly, YCAP is going to take the lead, be the primary lead on the local planning group for the House Bill 5019 sheltering homelessness money that we're anticipating coming our way. And I'm going to be on that along with this, excuse me, the CCO and UNIDOS is on there, and we're going to be looking at ways we can use that funding, because they're requiring a local planning group. Also, our suicide prevention, Kelsey Murray with county is also been joining our Oregon Firearm Safety Coalition, and we're looking at a statewide public storage map for people in crisis to be able to join a program that we're calling Hold My Guns. So we're looking at outreach to federal firearm license holders, to ranges, gun stores, so that we are sort of normalizing the transfer in any way we can of firearms for people who are in crisis. And also in terms of medical concerns in the jail, there is an amend the Medicaid Inmate Exclusion Act policy in a federal Social Security Act bill. So there's been a real push to support that, which would be an enormous help
Yeah,
to the counties.
absolutely.
Parkway met this morning. Nothing's changed really. They're still waiting for labor negotiations for phase 2A, which is the Winooski interchange.
They're going to miss the window.
If they agree today, it's still going to be, I think, next year construction. Most of the utilities are moved, most of the land clearing's done. There is a little bit of construction they can do during the winter time, but obviously no paving. So you may see, if they do get the labor contract squared away, you may see a little bit of construction start, but there won't be any road warm weather stuff like asphalt paving. Parks board meeting last night. They're going to wait to recommend until after July meeting so that they can get one more applicant interviewed from the West Valley. And that'll give us 3 applicants from the West Valley.
Great.
And then in their July meeting, they'll go through them all and do the recommendations then.
Okay.
Blew through all the passports, all 500 passports are gone. So now
Wow.
they're talking about just doing a straight up card now with a QR code
Mhm.
from here on out, because passports are, their budget's skinny. It's 300 some bucks left. It was only gonna print up another 100 passports, which is nothing considering the demand that we're going through right now. So they're just gonna go to a QR code, which they posted on Facebook, so you can scan the QR code, or it'll be at the places where the passports were. You can scan the QR code, or you can take the card with the QR code and do everything
Nice.
online. And our first parade for the Fair Ambassadors coming up,
Yeah.
Sheridan, Saturday.
Hometown days.
I'll send pictures later of
Ken and Christian, anything?
the float in progress. It's
I'll
pretty
be
cool.
there, so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we'll all be there. We'll be watching. too.
Okay.
All right. Commissioner.
No, I think the only thing, because we covered a lot of things, maybe about potential work sessions today, so maybe in the coming, maybe not necessarily in the next meeting or two, but if you have particular timing or dates that you want to see getting some of the work sessions on a calendar. So we can put that together and also make sure that we get everyone sufficient notice to come and participate, especially if we're going to talk about dog control and some of these other things. So if you have some input, or if we just want to put a date on the calendar we currently don't have anything scheduled on the work session calendar. So it's really up to the board on how soon you want to discuss some of these items. The other item is, I think we may need to, not for bargaining, but maybe have schedule an executive session here in the next couple weeks. Based on the latest issues that we're having with our planning building. I think it'd be worthwhile to maybe talk about some potential opportunities that are there. And we have a couple things in the works, but I'd like to be able to maybe come and talk to the board and talk about some of those transactions and negotiations. So it's kind of late breaking, we're still assessing the damage to the building right now. But hopefully maybe in the next 2 weeks, we may have some more information to get something on the calendar. So
Okay.
I know that's very general, but I'm just wanted on your radar.
Sounds good. So dog control, I think high level, let's get the budget done first, and then we can jump into dog control work session.
Okay.
In terms of the SIP program, IGA, community service fee, there's a timeline on that, so.
Yeah, 90 days from board adoption, which was May 25th. So now that we've put the McMinnville Fire District behind us, I hope to have some additional time to start I've got a draft. It's not complete yet, but I hope to get that circulated to the different districts next week, and then have those conversations. We have 90 days. So I think we're still in good shape to get that wrapped up.
Okay, so today is the last day of school for a lot of kiddos, so congratulations on our graduates, and summer's here, yay. I think tomorrow is the last day for some people too. Father's Day is Sunday, so happy Father's Day to all of our special dads out there. I hope it's sugar filled for you, Commissioner Johnston. And then just a reminder that Monday, the county offices are closed for Juneteenth. Commissioner Johnston, you weren't here for this decision, but a little over a year ago, the Board of Commissioners unanimously decided to recognize Juneteenth as a county paid holiday, because we felt it was important to recognize that important step towards the abolition of slavery. So that is now a county paid holiday. I think it was last year as well. It was in effect just last year. So we'll be closed Monday. So with that, I don't have anything else on my list. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Nope.
Okay. Then I will adjourn the Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal session for June 15th, 2023. It is 1:21. Thank you.